afternoon, everyone. This is the Wednesday, October 2nd, 2019 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Carla, good afternoon. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Udaley, Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and conduct.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony and resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you're a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you're in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you. And just a housekeeping item. There were 3 items that I believe are relatively quick that we had to bring from the morning agenda to the beginning of the afternoon agenda, but I think we can dispose of these relatively quickly. Carla, could you please call 936?
Accept bid of Cascade Bridge LLC for the North Rivergate Overcrossing Project for $15,891,102.
And this is a procurement report. We have Lester Spittler. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, City Council. I'm Lester Spittler, the city's Chief Procurement Officer. This is a PBOT project, and PBOT obtained an authorizing ordinance on April 3rd, ordinance number 189441. It's important to note that this is a federal aid project. PBOT was successful obtaining certification from ODOT in 2011 to participate in their local public agency certification program for delivery of federal aid projects. The engineer's estimate for this project before we solicited the invitation to bid was $17,712,521. The level of confidence in the estimate was moderate. We issued the invitation to bid in July. Bids were due on August 13th, and the city received 8 responsive bids. Cascade Bridge LLC is the apparent low bidder and is recommended awardee in the amount of $15,891,102, a little less than $2 million below the estimate. As I mentioned initially, this is a federal aid transportation project under the ODOT Federal Aid Highway Program. Because of that, the city is required to apply ODOT's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program goal to this project. ODOT set the goal at 13%. Cascade Bridge is responsive to the goal and has committed to utilizing 13.06% by using McDonald Excavation, a Native American mail-owned firm. It's also important to note that the city's compliance team will not be performing compliance on this project because it's an ODOT federal aid project. ODOT will administer their DBE program, their on-the-job site training program, as well as the Equal Employment Opportunity Program for the city. Cascade Bridge is located in Vancouver, Washington. They're in compliance with all of the city's contractual requirements. And with that, it is recommended that you accept this report and authorize execution of the contract. I have the PBOT project manager in the audience if you have any questions about the project itself.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lester. Appreciate the information. I noticed that the goal of this project for minority, women, and emerging small businesses was 13%, and this contractor with one contract alleges they will come in at 13.06.
Yeah.
How did we get a goal of 13%? One, and two, how do all these, and does the federal government have a different goal process for their dollars?
They do. As a recipient of federal highway administration funds, ODOT is required to have a DBE program in place. So they have conducted a disparity study and have hard goals that apply to their projects. Because this is an ODOT-funded project, their goal flows down to the city and becomes the only goal that we can include in the solicitation. The federal government only recognizes disadvantaged business enterprises. They do not recognize minority-owned business enterprises or women-owned business enterprises. So the disadvantaged business program is a federal program, and they only focus on that certification.
And so are we putting PBOT dollars into this program?
I'm going to ask Dan to come up, and I don't know exactly what the funding split is. I'm sorry.
Dan, could you also state your name for the record, please?
Thanks, Dan.
Dan Layden, Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'm the project manager. There are PBOT dollars in this project. The way federal projects work is once you have federal dollars in a project, all of the dollars are considered under the federal rules. So we do have about $7 million in system development charge funds in this project. However, the rules that they have set up are that all dollars fall under that same category.
I find that problematic, let me just say, because as you know, we have some goals of making sure that women, minorities, and emerging small businesses receive their fair share of federal dollars. I'm just seeing way too many of these that just are woefully inadequate, and so I'm done. I guess you've answered the question that I had. I appreciate that. I understand the firm is located in Vancouver, which would have been another question. Why are we using a Vancouver firm? Well, the project is in Vancouver. But maybe I should know why we're putting Portland transportation dollars into a Vancouver project.
Commissioner Hartsey, the project is not in Vancouver. The project is in Rivergate Industrial District, which is in North Portland.
Oh, okay.
The contractor
The contractor is based in
located
Vancouver?
is based in Vancouver.
And is that a normal, is that normal for a federal contract for us to be contracting with people out of the state of Oregon if we're trying to achieve goals with Oregon small businesses?
I'll let Lester answer that question.
Yeah, the federal regulations don't allow you to give preference to companies located in your state or outside of your state. You're not allowed to provide any preference in your solicitation. So anybody could bid on a federal aid project.
And I can say that the city, I believe in 2016, signed a certification agreement with ODOT and the Federal Highway Administration that said that for all projects that we bid through our certification process, we would use the federal disadvantaged business and enterprise practice, and also that would be administered by the Office of Civil Rights, and that is a requirement of their program.
And thank you for that. I appreciate that. So does that mean we get an annual report on how our dollars are being spent as they are merged with federal dollars, and whether or not we're reaching the goals of making sure that Oregon small businesses that are owned by women and people of color are actually getting their fair shot? How do we find out whether or not we're getting any bang for our investment?
With the federal program, I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. I know that the federal program is a mandatory program. The contractors are required to meet that goal, and if they don't meet that goal, they face an actual penalty, a fiscal penalty. But our money,
I wish we would do that for the contractors that we contracted with, that there was a fiscal penalty for not reaching the goal. Maybe that should be something we consider. Thank you very much. I appreciate your straightforwardness
Sure.
about the federal limitations, but let me be clear, we shouldn't have those limitations at the city of Portland.
Mayor, I move the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further discussion? Thank you for the conversation.
Are
I
there
learned
people
something,
signed up
too.
to testify?
This is a procurement
Or is this a
report.
report?
Please
Thank
call
you.
the roll.
Fritz,
Aye.
Fish.
I appreciate the conversation we just had about federal law, and I seem to remember from my days of practicing law that the federal government applies the Commerce Clause, which prohibits discrimination based on state borders, which is why there's open competition for these contracts. If we are bound as a matter of law to follow the federal rules, then we can complain all we want, but the only way to change that is to change the law in Washington, D.C., which I think should maybe be part of our legislative agenda. But for purposes of this procurement, you've satisfied me that we are following the rules, and I'll vote aye.
Hardesty.
Thank you so much for the information. I am not satisfied that the city of Portland does its fair share of making sure that contracting opportunities are available for all. I can appreciate that there are some federal regulations that are required when we are partnering with the federal government. However, that's not a good excuse to actually not focus on the goals that we have as a city, which is to ensure that we're creating opportunities for people who have not had those opportunities. I vote no.
Wheeler?
So this is an area, first of all, Commissioner Hardesty, thank you for raising the questions, because I learned something there as well. And this isn't an area I'm entirely familiar with, federal contracting standards and requirements. Philosophically, I agree with the commissioner that this probably should be something that we explore on our legislative agenda, because there does seem to be a disconnect between our local standards and what the federal standards are. And I agree with Commissioner Fish. It is a tall order for the city of Portland to be able to change federal policy, but we do have some stalwart leaders from the state of Oregon in Congress, and this is probably a worthwhile conversation for us to have. I agree that Portland is in a position where we can lead here on ultimately changing some of those policies. I vote aye on the procurement report. The report is approved. Thank you. Thank you. Next item is 937.
Accept bid of Stellar J Corporation for the Dam 1 Needle Valve Replacement Project for $1,499,000.
Now, just to remind our colleagues where we were on this, so we actually had this conversation, but we kept it open because we knew that Commissioner Fritz had some questions, and we wanted to honor that. So Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion, which I'm aware of. I was away at the League of Oregon Cities Conference last week, touring a filtration plant in Bend on this very day. I know, it was really interesting. So the issue is about the amounts of subcontracting and also the amounts of the complexity of this project. And so I wanted first to ask staff to talk about the complexity of the project, because we're talking about concrete work on the dam, which is Portland's drinking water source. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves and just give us a brief summary of why there aren't the usual subcontracting opportunities like for flagging and landscaping and other such things that we often see in subcontracts.
I'm Teresa Elliott, Chief Engineer, Portland Water Bureau. I'm going to do a high level on the technical, and then I'm going to let Jody Inman, the design manager, explain a little further. From our perspective, working on the needle valves is complex, special work. There's not that many people in the country that do work on that. And doing work for us up in the watershed, we always have a much smaller pool of contractors that are interested in doing it, because if they do work up there, they can't do work in town at the same time. And contractors have a tendency of wanting to do multiple projects concurrent. So we just don't get as many contractors willing to take that on. This project has a time sensitiveness on it, in that we have to start work in November, and in order to be complete by April. I'll let Jody talk more specific.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. I'm Jody Inman with the Portland Water Bureau. You are right, Commissioner Fritz, this is a very complex project and one we consider a very high-risk project to the Water Bureau. For one, this work is work that is being done on our dam, the face of our dam, and integral to our dam, which holds back 9 billion gallons of water. So we're very interested in making sure that we have a qualified contractor that's going to be touching such a valuable asset. Another very critical component and concern and risk for the Water Bureau on this project is a water quality concern. This project involves demolition and construction work directly over our Reservoir 2 on the face of the dam. So one of the key components of this project, and a lot of the work, has to do with being able to ensure that we receive isolation for that demolition work from the reservoir to protect any debris or hazardous substances such as asbestos and lead, which we will be dealing with on the existing valve structure as we demolish it, from getting into the reservoir. So that's very critical for us. Access has to be over the reservoir too. So you have to be having a barge bring materials to and from the shore to the dam face to do the work. So again, needing somebody very specialized and experienced with being able to provide the disinfection and protections we require to our active water supply is critical. As Teresa mentioned, schedule is also very critical for this project. The needle valves are our primary component for being able to do temperature management in order to comply with our habitat conservation plan. What the needle valves allow us to do is to take water off of the top of the reservoir early in the year instead of the bottom. That allows us to reserve cold water in the reservoir to be able to send downstream later in the summer when the lower Bull Run River begins to heat up. Without that cold water, it is very likely that we would not be able to meet our obligations, having violations and potential danger to existing fish downstream. So a very critical piece of getting this work done.
Thank you. And so that kind of explains why 87% was being done by the one contractor. So the goal is 20% of the subcontracted money. And so there's 13% subcontracted. Of those 13%, 2.2% is going to a minority emerging small business, which is 22% of the subcontract. So it does actually meet the goal for over 20% of the subcontracted work going to a minority emerging small business.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, how did you get to 22%?
Because the 2.2 of the whole contract is
Certified COBID businesses, right?
Correct.
Which are minority, women, and emerging small businesses.
right. So that's about a fifth of 13%. So 2.2. So of the 13, it's 2.2 not certified, and
And then the other, we don't know who they are. They're non-certified.
They're non-certified, right.
So again, I mean, I appreciate, thank you, I appreciate your questions, but yeah, it is still, we have barely over 2% minority contractors for this project.
right. And I think we all agree that that's not what we want to see. On the other hand, as we say, this is an emergency. This is a project that needs to be done in the time frame, and that this is the low bid of the people that bid on it. Mr. Spurler, do you have something to add?
Well, I just want to say to our chief engineer, when I had the Bureau, I remember getting a briefing once about the pipe that we're going to build under the Willamette River, which is a resilient pipe to ensure water supply to the west side. And one of the things that I learned in the briefing is that that kind of work underwater, under extreme conditions, is highly specialized, that it doesn't lend itself to a lot of subcontracting opportunities. There's a handful of companies that do it and are good at it, and we're going to have this conversation again. That the difference is that's a big number contract when we get around to bidding that out. So I would urge you, in anticipation of that discussion, that we get some council briefings on, when we get some numbers, because I think we're going to have the same conversation except with a bigger ticket item. And I think this question about who can do the work and are there subcontracting opportunities for certain highly specialized work, particularly for the water bureaus, I learned over time, is something the council is going to have to be informed about. Sure.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Lester, can you tell me how many contracts Stellar J Corporation has had with the city of Portland?
I can get back to you. I don't know offhand.
Any estimate?
Well, I know that last week during the discussion, I highlighted the existing contracts that they had, and there were 5 contracts. I think they were all pump station projects with environmental services. But I can follow up with the total number of contracts that they've had.
And the total dollar amount would be very helpful, because again, if we've got big ticket items coming up and we know we're going to be hiring the same company and we're going to come back with the same reason for why there are no minorities or women working on the project, we have a great opportunity to actually help that company identify opportunities for them to build a workforce that's diverse, or to build partnerships with other companies to help them get built. And you're right, we will have this conversation over and over and over again until I'm satisfied that we're actually making progress. Thank you.
Can I just speak to the good faith effort made by Stellar J to obtain utilization? I think it's important to know that they did go, in our opinion, above and beyond, and I want to put that on the record. So we reviewed their efforts to obtain utilization. I had our compliance supervisor review that personally, and she has 10 years as a professional doing this work. So the 20% aspirational goal is a part of the city's subcontractor equity program. That program has been authorized by council. It has admin rules. There's a clear definition on what we consider a good faith effort. So the compliance supervisor, she attended the pre-bid, she attended the bid opening, she saw the job is an hour and a half away. There was a confidentiality requirement just in order to obtain the specs because of the nature of the work. And Stellar J provided the minimum 3 written bids in response to each of their subcontractable trades that they weren't going to self-perform. Oftentimes, primes cannot provide 3 written bids from subcontractors, but they were able to provide that, which means that they did intentionally engage with those firms and try to get them to perform on the contract. The responses to those were that they were rejecting the opportunity because of the risk, because of the nature of the work, and the fact that it was so far out and it required a lot of risk. So, I did just want to say that we feel like they've gone above and beyond. We closely reviewed their good faith effort, and I just wanted to put that on the record.
Mayor, I move the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Fritz?
These are important conversations. Thank you very much to everybody who presented, Lester Spitlard, Teresa Elliott, and Jody Inman. Really appreciate your coming and being here all morning as well. Perhaps the part of the solution is to do another disparity study specifically on this kind of work. And thank you to my colleagues for delaying the vote till today, as well as my Chief of Staff, Tim Crail, and Senior Policy Advisor, Christina Nieves. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Hardesty?
No.
Wheeler?
One other issue, and I realize this is a procurement report, so it's somewhat specific in its intentions, but the description last week of city employees jumping up and down on a valve in order to try and get it unstuck, that's an image that left an indelible impression in my mind, and it strikes me as being an incredibly unsafe working condition. And so I would hope if there are other circumstances throughout our city's infrastructure where things like that are taking place, that we prioritize those issues for this safety and benefit of our employees. I vote aye. Procurement report is adopted. And last but not least from this morning's agenda, 939. And I believe Dory Van Bockel is here.
Approve application under the multiple unit limited tax exemption program for 18th Avenue Apartments located at 5205 Southeast 18th Avenue.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Dory Van Bockel. I'm with the Portland Housing Bureau, and I manage the Development Incentives team. We have a multiple unit limited tax exemption application before you from the Incenting the Pipeline program, which is a version of the program requiring 20% of units affordable at 60% of area median income or below for 10 years in exchange for 10 years of affordability. This particular use of the program was approved by you in late 2018 as a means to capture affordability in the large number of units that were vested in through permitting or land use action ahead of the inclusionary housing program going into place. And so this project is voluntarily providing affordability in exchange for this tax exemption. In doing so, the apartment building named 18th Avenue Apartments, which is at Southeast 18th and McLaughlin, they would be required to provide 12 of the 56 units. However, they have opted to, or 59 units, excuse me, they have opted to use the reconfiguration option and provide larger unit sizes, but still the same number of total bedrooms, meaning that they'll provide 1 2-bedroom and 5 3-bedroom units in the building as affordable for that 10-year period. This is the first project for this particular developer within this program, and only the second developer wanting to take advantage of this Incenting the Pipeline version of the multi-program. I'm happy to answer
Mayor?
any questions.
Commissioner Fish.
Would you remind us By virtue of the agreement we made with the county, what's the annual cap on this program?
So the annual cap of the multi-program total was at 3 million. However, we also approved a rolling cap over 5 years, so $15 million over 5 years. So,
And this is only the second time it's been used, or the second time this year?
well, for the multi-program, that would include any of the approvals that come before council, also in conjunction with inclusionary housing program.
Right.
So we have, been bringing a handful of those
With the
forward
inclusionary
under-
housing?
Under that same cap.
I see, under the same cap, but we're obviously well under the cap, right?
Yes, we are. And for this particular version of the program, it's being offered for a limited time. We have approval for applications to come in through June 30 of 2020.
And my second question and final question is, we obviously have a shortage of the larger apartments.
Yes.
So it's something to celebrate that they're going to leverage some family-sized apartments. What is the explanation for why the developer chose to go this route?
They can provide fewer units this way, which is probably easier in a regulatory component that
I see,
way,
that's the
but,
trade-off.
yeah,
Fewer units, but bigger units.
Yes, and, for this particular project, the benefit of the tax exemption that we're estimating at around 14,000 per unit a year is actually roughly the difference between the rent of a market rate unit and the affordable unit.
And it's a 10-year exemption?
Yes,
Okay, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Very good. Any further questions? Any public testimony on this item? Carla?
I'm not sure if Jeanne, Maggie, and Courtney came back from this morning. We do have Charles Bridge Crane Johnson.
Come on up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dory. Appreciate it.
Good. It's hard for me to say good afternoon, commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. When we look at the limited application of this program, I'm not familiar enough with it to know why it's at that shorter frame of 10 years, but obviously I don't think we can look at a longer scope if only twice in the program's history has it been used. One thing that isn't clear, and I think that we might all want to concern yourself with, is how will these set-aside units be connected with tenants? Different agencies have different waiting lists, and all those waiting lists are good, all those people are in need. But I think that the city should have, through the Housing Bureau, or in partnership with Home Forward, or in partnership with Aging and Disability Services, a consistent plan to triage and prioritize getting needy people into these apartments. I know there's a number of programs that are administered, but the need is obvious everywhere around us. The other thing that occurred to me is I was very glad that the presenter specifically mentioned McLaughlin when the printout only says 50. Where's the 5200 block of Southeast 18th? Well, now we know it's McLaughlin. I don't know the demographics of the whole city, but if the people that get this place happen to be people of color, how white of a neighborhood are they going into, and what sort of supports or having their back will either the housing provider or the people making the connection do? So when we talk about gentrification, some families are happy to move into areas where they're very much in the minority and take a chance. But as a city, I hope that whether it's through the Portland Human Rights Commission, through equity officials in Home Forward or the Housing Bureau, minority tenants always know that they can look to the city of Portland and make sure that if they go into an area where their minority status is maybe more obvious than it is in some other neighborhoods, this city has their back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz,
Aye.
Fish,
Aye.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Next items are time-certain items from this afternoon's agenda, 943 and 944, read together, please.
943, accept the 2018 Annual Report of the Portland Police Bureau, and 944, adopt Portland Police Bureau's fiscal year 1920 Community Engagement Plan.
Colleagues, the city and the United States Department of Justice entered into a settlement agreement in 2012 to make reforms to the way the city provides policing services, particularly as those services related to people with mental illness or experiencing mental health crisis. Let me just say that it has always been our goal to decrease and de-escalate interactions between police and those experiencing mental health crisis, and we continue to work towards that end. One of the many requirements of the agreement calls for the Police Bureau to prepare an annual report and present it to the council. That's the first item that we'll be hearing today. Another major focus of the agreement is to enhance the Police Bureau's engagement with the community. The city has made significant efforts to engage the community and has benefited from dedicated volunteers in this regard, both on the Community Oversight Advisory Board and on the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, or PSEP. The work of the PSEP is governed by a plan developed with robust feedback from the community, particularly the Albina Ministerial Alliance for Justice and Police Reform. We're grateful for their continuing dedication and advocacy on these critical issues. The settlement agreement and the PSEP plan both require that the PSEP and the Police Bureau collaborate on a community engagement plan and that the council approve that plan. That is the second item that we'll be taking up today. You will find that the 2018 annual report is much different than previous reports in that it incorporates feedback received from the PSEP. In the past, annual reports were statistically heavy and didn't provide as much context. This report is more interactive and features links to other relevant documents and to the Bureau's open data page for those who wanted to do a deeper dive into crimes and data. In addition, Chief Outlaw has asked each division manager to submit information on that division's challenges and accomplishments, which provides a much fuller picture of Bureau activities. Turning to the community engagement plan, it represents a step forward for the Bureau. It builds on existing community engagement efforts, and it's intended to be a living document that will evolve over time. The plan was created in collaboration with the PSEP and with feedback from numerous public forums. The Bureau's Equity and Inclusion Office and Community Engagement units also contributed to the plan. This plan contains goals and action items in 4 specific areas: public involvement, communications, access, and training. This plan identifies new outreach and engagement efforts that will be undertaken in the coming year, in addition to the many existing outreach activities being done every day. The Bureau will report back to the PSEP on its work over the first year of the plan and will collaborate with the PSEP to make the changes going forward. These changes will foster deeper and more meaningful engagement with the community. This is a key component of the Bureau's commitment to 21st century policing. My thanks to the PSEP and the Chief Outlaw and to her team for continuing work on the community engagement plan. Today, our presenters include Chief Danielle Outlaw, Lakiana Drury, who is the PSEP co-chair, and Vadim Mozirski, who is the Settlement Agreement Subcommittee. Are you the chair or a member?
Member.
Member of the Settlement Agreement Subcommittee. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
PSEP, yeah. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Danielle Outlaw, Chief of Portland Police Bureau, and again, I'd like to thank Lakiana and Vadim for being here with me. It's my pleasure to be here today to present the 2018 annual report and the community engagement plan. But before doing so, I'd like to reiterate the mayor's comments. We had a great deal of input into both of these documents. My thanks to the members of the Portland Committee on Community Engagement Policing, as well as the members of the Albina Ministerial Alliance for Justice and Police Reform. I'm also grateful to all the community members who took the time and effort to come to our strategic planning, public forums, and provided insight. And finally, thank you to the many Bureau members who helped develop and craft these documents. I'll start with the annual report. The Police Bureau has always published an annual report, but it was a document that mainly sat on our website and was a report of crime statistics and PPB general information. This year, well, for 2018, based on the feedback from the PSEP's review of the 2017 report, I asked each of our RU managers to detail their division's respective accomplishments and challenges. We took additional recommendations from the PSEP on what they wanted to see the annual report look like, and we implemented them. These included preparing a first draft of the report by June of 2019 to allow PSEP members to be able to comment. Also, they recommended that we add information on annual challenges and areas of improvement. This includes hyperlinks to applicable information found elsewhere, such as statistical data analysis directives, and more. Also presented, and presenting this annual report to City Council as required in the settlement agreement with the DOJ. The only recommendation that we did not complete was listing our annual goals and priorities, and including assessment of the progress toward meeting them. That is because the Bureau's goals and priorities will be set by our forthcoming strategic plan, which we anticipate to be completed by the end of this year. So with the recommendation made regarding tracking our improvement metrics and self-assessing how we compared to those goals and priorities, we believe we'll be able to do that once the strategic plan is implemented in our future annual reports. For some reason, I can't say strategic plan today, amongst other things. After receiving these recommendations, we wrote the report outlining the accomplishments and challenges that fell in the goals I established when I became the chief. These are organizational excellence, crime prevention and reduction, and community engagement and inclusion. Therefore, the 2018 report is far more interactive and better tells the story of what PPB was working on in 2018. In regards to crime, the Department of Justice settlement agreement, and the use of force, we had several accomplishments as well as challenges. We'll start with crime. As outlined on page 2 of the report, crime remained stable compared to the prior year. The majority of offenses experienced slight changes, while a few had larger increases or decreases. As stated previously, we provided a link to our open data page on our website at portlandpolice.com on page 24 of the report, which gives users the opportunity to look at all crime statistics and refine them to their own neighborhood or specific geographical areas. In the report, we also included our significant progress on the DOJ settlement agreement and the numerous policies that were reviewed. A specific challenge that we faced was that our policy development team spent a large part of the year conducting the DOJ requirement of an initial review 6 months after DOJ-related directives had been enacted. Therefore, that limited the team's ability to address other policies. It is hoped now that they can turn toward the 100 directives that need addressing. It should be noted that the 6-month review schedule changes to annually now, which will help the team's ability to work on additional directives. We also continue to still be challenged in meeting our 180-day timeline for the completion of internal affairs investigations. We recognize the procedural justice implications inherent in these delays and the toll it takes on all of those involved, and we continue to work to reduce this timeline. And I'm actually optimistic that that has since been resolved or will be resolved by the end of this year. Also last year, we had 6 officer-involved shootings. We understand the use of deadly force impacted our efforts to build and maintain trust in the community. We will continue to focus on our robust review process, communications, training, and policies to further improve trust and legitimacy in our communities. In regards to staffing and our personnel, staffing remained our biggest significant issue, with each division citing it as a challenge. That, combined with special events, planned or unplanned, greatly impacted and affected our personnel. For example, during some of these events, there was a delay in responding to Priority 1 emergency calls. Because responding to emergency calls for service is the #1 priority, specialty units, like the traffic division, continue to provide rotational support 25% of the time. This impacts their ability to address their workload in their respective divisions. As we continue to hire and train new officers, we know staffing issues are going to remain for some time. And because of that, we realized the Bureau has to be far more innovative and embrace technology to use our resources most effectively and efficiently. As an example, the Bureau implemented the beginning of a more collaborative policing model where divisions come together to combine resources to focus on significant crimes and livability issues. The Gun Violence Reduction Team is an example of this. Also, PPB made great strides in data-driven policing, rolling out Tableau software to assist precinct and division leadership in fulfilling my request to use data to inform resource deployment. As it relates to recruitment and hiring, the Bureau continued to be challenged with the length of time it took to process applications. However, to address this, Bureau personnel spent considerable time reviewing our hiring processes to look for efficiencies and enhancements. This included incorporating new technology, implementing timelines for various stages, and evaluating factors that can reduce this timeline without sacrificing the integrity of the system. Another challenge remains in recruiting diversity for the PPB, and it's also a priority. We began to look at our recruitment and hiring efforts through an equity lens to better understand any barriers for hiring diverse candidates. Also along the lines of equity, the Bureau continued with our implicit bias training, which every sworn member went through. We implemented procedural justice training, which is now, I'm proud to say, incorporated into every aspect of the Bureau's policies and training. And finally, the Bureau embarked on the strategic planning process, which will focus PPB's direction for 5 years. The many public forums and listening sessions provided great feedback and insight. We participated in numerous events as well as hosting open houses at each precinct and the traffic division. We also created new barbershop and salon forums to better engage the community in smaller groups to have productive discussions and receive feedback. We're also keeping better track of these activities through our new community engagement app that officers use. All of this is just a snapshot of what's in the report, but once again, I want to thank everyone who was involved, who had input in this particular document. Shall I go on to the community engagement plan?
Are there any questions so far about the annual report? Commissioner Hardesty?
I have a lot of questions about the annual report, so can we just do one at a time?
Sure. Did you want us to continue through the community engagement plan first?
What's your
Hold it?
preference, Chief? I'm open.
It's up to you. That was all I had to state for the annual report.
I mean,
Why don't you go
questions
ahead and
now.
ask your questions now?
Thank you, Chief. Thanks, Mayor.
Sure.
And thank you for a report that's easy to follow, that's easy to read, and has real numbers in it. I am greatly appreciative of the improvement in the annual report. Having said that, I have a couple of questions. Many of these I spoke to you about, Chief, when you met with me in my office, so it won't be a surprise to you that I'm asking these questions. My first question actually has to do with one that I didn't ask you, which is, what is the difference between the Metro Gun Task Force and the Gun Violence Reduction Team?
So the Metro Task Force is a smaller facet that works within, under the umbrella of the Tactical Operations Division. So those are officers that are assigned to a task force with other officers from the agency, and together they conduct criminal investigations throughout the region. The Gun Violence Reduction Team is responsible for now investigating all shootings that occur here in the city.
So does that mean the Metro Gun Task Force is a subset of the Gun Violence Reduction Team?
It means it's a subset within the division itself. So no, not necessarily. They may work together, but it's not a subset specifically of the GVRT.
So, thank you. So one of the questions I asked you when you were in my office was my concern that I can no longer track now whether or not the same people are being targeted for gun violence reduction that were being targeted for gang enforcement. I've noticed in your annual report that there are places that you talk about gang activity, yet because of the new way that you're counting, I can't hold you accountable for what you told me last year about the gang enforcement unit. How internally are you tracking that data to determine that these now gun violence reduction officers, which there's 24, 26, something like that, are these officers doing the exact same thing they were doing when they were part of the gang enforcement unit? And if they're not, what is the difference between what the gun violence reduction team does and what the gang enforcement team used to do?
So when you and I talked, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about or asking how are we going to continue to track stop data?
Yes, and how do we actually hold you accountable from one year to the next? Because when you change the name, all of a
Right.
sudden, we're tracking something different
Right.
than what we were tracking the year before.
So we'll continue to track the same information. However, given that we send the gun violence reduction team officers to respond to additional types of calls, the types of statistics have changed. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be apples to oranges. It just means now that the GVRT, with the additional types of crimes that they respond to, are now tracking in a different way. So we expect to have the GVRT stats, I hope, all inputted by either the end of this month or early November. So then that way we can include their stop data results with the rest of the reports that we have.
Thank you. I also mentioned that I was surprised that in your annual report that I didn't see any mention of hate crimes because I've been told that Portland Police Bureau actually investigates hate crimes. Is there a plan to add that? And you mentioned that trafficking also was not part of this annual report.
Yeah,
Are there other parts that I didn't mention that also are missing and that will be part of updates?
So I think, and for both of us, and I misspoke when I shared that. So if you go to page 14, under the investigations branch, it talks about how many bias crimes were investigated. It says 14 potential bias crimes were investigated, and of those, 8 bias crimes were identified. So it does touch base on how many we received and accepted, but I don't know how much further detail you want as it relates to that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, bias crimes could cover a whole range of activity. I would be very interested in more demographic data around what does that mean? Who is being impacted by the hate crimes in the community? And really, what hate crimes is Portland Police Bureau investigating? Because there seems to be a conflict between what the DOJ investigates, what the state of Oregon investigates, and what Portland Police Bureau investigates. So I need to be clearer about what's Portland Police Bureau's responsibility in that. And last but not least, because I'm sure that there's a couple of other things that we have that we need to talk about. So tell me a little bit about air support. That's something new that I've not seen in a report before. Do we have a plane?
We do.
And we used it 387 times last year?
Yeah, I mean, if you want further detail about the air support, I'd have to come back and report out to you. But yes, we do have a plane. It's a very, most cities have helicopters. We have a plane. It's very intensive as far as the amount of training that it goes into getting the flight officers up to speed and ready to go. But we use them a lot for providing overhead or overwatch for whether it's crowd control or crowd management or assisting on pursuits. It gives us an opportunity to pull back when we need to on the ground level, so we have a bird's eye view up in the air.
And we have that expertise in-house to be able to fly a plane?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. My last question, at least for the moment. My question has to do with, I just lost my train of thought.
I'll jump in and you want to come back?
Okay, please, yes, I'll come back.
Commissioner Fish.
I missed my last one.
I want to echo what my colleague said. Thank you for a very readable annual report. I'd like to turn to page 12, which has to do with traffic division. And sorry that Commissioner Udaly is not here because I think she would echo a number of the things that I'm going to say and questions I'm going to raise. The first question I have is, would it be possible to pull some data and to show over the last 10 years what the staffing level has been in the traffic division? So whereas I'd like to see over a 10-year period, I mean, I keep hearing that we have significantly reduced the number of people in the traffic division, but I'd like to see a 10-year trend, if I could. Second, there is a data point in this report that jumped out at me that frankly, it just was astonishing, which is almost 6,000 hit-and-run offenses. Could you tell us just, and I think I know what a hit-and-run is sort of generically, but because you're the police chief, how do you describe hit-and-run offenses? How do you describe that category?
A hit and run would be when there's a collision that takes place and either the responsible party or one of the parties does not stay on scene until the police respond.
Okay, and so and there could be a myriad of reasons, but is it possible that one of the reasons is that one of the parties involved in the hitting, if you will, the person responsible for the injury is impaired?
It could be.
So that's an enormous number. I think people would be surprised to hear almost 6,000 hit-and-run offenses. I'd also like to ask for a 10-year data set on traffic citations. It's difficult for me to put in context the 12,303 traffic citations issued again, but if the staffing has been significantly reduced, my guess is we're going to see a significant reduction in traffic citations. The report also says that you conducted approximately 55 Vision Zero missions. What's an example of a Vision Zero mission?
An example would be where, again, we're talking about data-driven deployment. So working with our partners with PBOT and other agencies, depending on where the data shows us, if a specific intersection shows that it's a problem area, we work with our partner agencies to work on enforcement and education and engineering. But on our end, the enforcement piece, the mission specifically would be traffic enforcement in those areas.
Traffic enforcement. I'll close just with a very brief story. Several months ago, at my request, PBOT leadership took me on a tour of East Portland hotspots. And I wanted to see firsthand what some of these high crash corridors look like. And I wanted to understand what were the physical barriers, what were the infrastructure deficits, what were the kind of obvious deficiencies of key intersections and roads where we were seeing some of the highest concentrations of both fatalities and serious injuries. So it was a fascinating trip, and I recommend to all my colleagues, we talk about high crash corridors, but there's nothing like actually seeing them. And frankly, one of the things that surprised me is a number of the high crash intersections were intersections that had lights, that had plenty of infrastructure, had sidewalks, had striping. The problem wasn't with investment in infrastructure. The problem was with behavior and how we got people, for example, making a left turn to be more aware of pedestrians, how we got to slow people down coming through the intersection. There were other things, but it wasn't necessarily because there had been a, quote, deficit of infrastructure. The point I want to make, though, is that we were out there for several hours hitting all the sort of, I'm going to call them high points or low points of such a tour. And not once did we see a police officer. So there were no officers that we saw cruising in their cars. We saw no one walking a beat. In fact, the only time we saw a police officer was when we stopped for lunch and at a sub shop, and an officer came in, and officers are entitled to have lunch, so we had a chance to visit with one of your employees. But there was no visibility, and I realize this is in the realm of anecdote, and it's not like we covered every inch of East Portland, but I was struck by the fact that there was how limited the police presence was. And I just want to put down a marker off this data because I know that this is 2018 data. I know that our fatalities are up over even, at this point, even what we had total last year.
Right.
And we're going backwards in some areas, and we're even seeing, fatalities in places where we've done road diets and made other improvements, and we're still seeing bad behavior on the street. I intend to work with my colleague, Commissioner Udaley, during the budget to talk about what is the right sizing of the police bureau in terms of traffic enforcement if we're going to meet our Vision Zero goals? And that's a conversation that I want to start by getting the right data on it. But if we're not enforcing the law, or if we're not present, so that the presence of a police officer discourages someone from doing something reckless, I think it's just more likely that we're going to continue to see a bad trend line. I'm pleased that you've committed to work closely with PBOT on Vision Zero enforcement missions, but again, the data is discouraging right now, and I am personally interested in knowing how much of this can be attributed to inadequate enforcement, and what it would look like to have, the right sizing at the Bureau, what it would cost. So thank you in advance for getting me that data, and then I look forward to having a follow-up conversation with you about costs and priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Commissioner
Mayor.
Hardesty.
I have two more questions. One has to do with seizures. Your report says that there was $2 million seized in cash and $360,000 in non-cash assets and 27 guns. What happens to that $2 million that is seized?
Well, most of it goes into our asset forfeiture fund, and I'm not the expert to speak on this, but we are allowed to use that by law within certain parameters, but we use a lot of that for internal needs, whether it's training or infrastructure.
So is so that's considered money that the police bureau has available for whatever it is they think they need to use it for. The Sunshine Division is listed, and it lists as, the data that's listed is 21,000 families were served, and I get very confused. My understanding the Sunshine Division is not a Portland Police Bureau organization anymore. That sometimes the police partner with Sunshine Division to deliver food. What's the percentage of what Sunshine Division does that's actually really Portland Police Bureau? I get concerned when the police takes credit for work that other people in the community are doing. And so because I know there's a partnership, it would be better to know this is what the police has done and this is kind of what the community as a whole has done. Because I've seen that a couple of times, and it gives us a misperception of the role that police are playing out in our community.
I don't have an answer to the question as far as the percentage goes. We do have an officer assigned to the Sunshine Division.
That is correct. There's one
Yeah.
officer that's assigned.
And
then,
as you know, it is a partnership. So we
Yes.
refer a lot of the families to the Sunshine Division, but I understand your
But you
question.
understand, if you just put data that say we gave away this much food, somebody will read that report and assume that Portland Police Bureau gave that much food to families, and that would not be an accurate statement. And I do want to say to my colleague, I live in East Portland. We're just starting to get infrastructure like streets and lights and sidewalks and yellow lines. But if you go off the main street, you will find that there are still gravel roads, and we do not have the infrastructure. So the problem is partly not having the appropriate infrastructure. But I did want to ask one more question.
Just to be clear, and I appreciate that comment, I'm talking about identified high crash corridor networks, and we visited all the hotspots, and I had expected to find an infrastructure deficit at a number of those intersections. What I learned was they were intersections like any other intersection, built out, but because of the number of lanes, because of some bad habits, because of inadequate barriers in terms of people making turns, people were dying in those intersections, but it wasn't the result of an inadequate investment in basic infrastructure.
I will have to agree to disagree on that, but thank you. One last question has to do with, as we talk about really the needs of law enforcement and where we need law enforcement to be, we still will need to talk about school resource officers and whether that's the most appropriate place for them to be, or whether they should be actually on the street patrolling our neighborhood. We should also be talking about whether or not paying to have Portland police officers provide transit security for TriMet in the three-county area is something we should be doing under these current conditions because I am also troubled that we have officers, but we have them doing things that may or may not be the priorities for the city of Portland today. So again, thank you for your hard work. I greatly appreciate the report, but I look forward to having more additional information as we continue on. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. I want to ask questions. As the police commissioner, I'm familiar with what's in the report, but I also want to give the bigger picture again. Remember, we are understaffed in the police bureau. And so part of the reason that over a period of many, many years, the traffic enforcement division has been reduced is we have prioritized other areas over that function. And it's a legitimate question as to whether or not it should be reprioritized. But I also want to give this chief credit for making some very difficult decisions in order to improve recruitment for the Portland Police Bureau. And so far, at least one of the major changes that Chief Outlaw has made, at least in the near term, seems to be generating considerably positive results in terms of the number of new recruits that we are seeing after a period where those new recruits seem to have plateaued. We seem to see a regeneration of interest. I also want to thank my colleagues when a year and a half ago, the chief and I asked for additional policing resources. You'll recall it was a very controversial question. The council supported that, but I want to remind people that there are training and certification standards that take almost 2 years between the time that we make a decision to fund and the time that people actually come on board. And we've been more flexible in terms of how we deploy resources. For example, the public safety specialist program is another example of how we have sought to change things. With regard to traffic enforcement, I want to remind everybody that there is another option that isn't just about deploying more police officers to traffic enforcement, although personally I support that. I want to know what the trade-off is in terms of what we are then reducing support for. But we, as a city, prior to my getting here, made a commitment to cameras. And that commitment really wasn't lived up to because it turned out that in many regards, state policies, practices, and regulations thwart us. In other words, a police officer has to be, a certified police officer has to be the one reviewing that video and making sure that at the end of the day, what's on the camera is a legitimate citation. And it's my understanding that other states have different ways of organizing that, different ways of arranging it. I believe there were conversations with the legislature this year that ultimately were not fruitful, but that's a conversation I think we can continue to have with the legislature. And Chief, one area where I expect to see improved results in large measure because of your leadership was on auto theft. We'll all recall that a year and a half ago, auto theft was the issue du jour. It was on the front page of every newspaper. People were outraged to learn that you could literally just tell a police officer, my friend Joe lent me the keys to the car and I have no idea who Joe is or where he is or anything about this car, and you could effectively avoid prosecution. We went to the legislature, we changed that law, and it would be my expectation that the 7,000 or so incidents that are reported in the 2018 report, we'll start to see that go down as enforcement goes up. That would be, just a couple of my expectations. I also want to thank you, Chief. The goal here isn't to write a report that only data analysts can love and appreciate. Really, we want it to be accessible to the community. And while this will be an evolving document with time, I think this is a really, really big step in the right direction. And I appreciate the hard work you and your team put into it.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the report before we move into the community engagement plan? Very good. Lakian, are you up next?
I don't think so. We can go at the end.
Okay.
I'd prefer
However you guys want to do it.
Yeah.
It's your
So
show.
turning to the community engagement plan, I think it's monumental for us at the Portland Police Bureau, as this was our very first plan, and it's a living document, and it will continue to evolve. It was created in collaboration, again, with the PSEP and from feedback from the strategic plan public forums. During its development, members of the PSEP made 3 recommendations, and PPB adopted all of those. The first one was to change the mission statement of the Office of Community Engagement. And then they also asked that PPB demystify the policy process. I think that's rather fair. And then we also agreed to work with the mayor and city council and relevant bureaus to create a truth and reconciliation work group based on the recommendations made. This plan identifies new outreach and engagement efforts that the Bureau will be undertaking in the coming year, in addition to the many existing activities Bureau members already undertake. There are 4 key areas outlined in the plan. The first is increasing public involvement with ongoing opportunities for meaningful community engagement and inclusion. Next is expanding and improving existing communication strategies and techniques. Then ensuring accessibility to the Bureau for all communities, including those with limited English proficiency or physical challenges. And then enhancing the knowledge base of both PPB and the public to better serve the diverse communities in our city. PPB, as shared before, will report back to the PSEP on its work over the first year of the plan and will collaborate with PSEP to make changes going forward to foster deeper and more meaningful engagement with our community. This is a key component of the Bureau's commitment to 21st century policing, and it's a great start. As I said, this will continue to evolve and develop. I think even over the last couple of weeks, we've seen some areas where we could be more engaging, specifically as it relates to our young people in the community as well. Thank you again to everyone who contributed, as well as Bureau members, but specifically our Community Engagement Unit and our Equity and Inclusion Office, who were committed to working on this plan from the start and will continue to move it forward. Turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for having us, and City Council, and Chief Outlaw also for inviting us to be a part of this. I'm really proud of the PSEP committee for being able to take on these issues in our first year and be able to give input on both of these plans. I think that was really important, and went through a number of processes to engage the community and provide a public platform for them to be a part of this as well. It's positive to see that PPB took a lot of these recommendations and incorporated them into their plan. I think that's really important, and as the chief had mentioned, that more time in the future for these plans will allow us to even further provide feedback. We just had our meeting last Tuesday and heard a lot of...
Lakian, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you do me a favor? Could you introduce yourself for the record and just for the benefit of council and maybe some of the folks here, could you give us a few sentences about yourself? You're a volunteer, you've stepped forward. I personally really appreciate your leadership, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your name for the record. Please.
Yeah, Lakian Drury, co-chair of PSEP.
And what does that mean?
Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. Thank you, Commissioner. Sit on the steering committee, just really passionate about engaging the community, making sure that we're holding the police bureau accountable, and also, you know, finding this fine line of being a bridge for the police and the community to engage. And that's really what we've worked on in this first year. There's a lot of tasks that we've had to take on, and that's just why I said I was really proud of us that we were able to get to this in addition to all the other things that we're trying to doing, some of which I can address in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. As far as the community engagement plan, we held our meeting last week and were able to get additional feedback from the community on that, but it was great to see that platform. A couple of things that they had mentioned, just making sure that all PPB facilitated boards are public. It was brought to our attention last week that the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee does not hold public meetings as the other PPB facilitated boards do. So I think that's something that we can continue to work on and make sure that people have access to them. The accountability was in the annual report, but wasn't mentioned in the community engagement plan from what we saw. So just making sure that you know, that's a #1 priority for us as well. I'm glad Commissioner Hardesty brought up the GVRT. This is the exact kind of information that the community's been wondering too, is like what was that transition from the gang enforcement team to GVRT? And so tomorrow we're going to be holding a public meeting on gun violence in Portland. It's at 5 p.m. at Highland Church, and we'll be hearing from the GVRT about that specific issue, about what that transitions look like, allow the community to have their questions answered, and then make recommendations for how GVRT can better serve the community. And yeah, we want to do similar things on that with, in regards to the upcoming PPA, Portland Police Association collective bargaining agreement and make sure that there's a space in there for the community to have their voice heard. I know you guys had a work session on that yesterday, and it sounded very positive, and we look forward to working with PPA to create more spaces, inform the community, and really foster that community engagement.
Thanks, Lucky.
Anything you want to add, Vadim?
Yes, hello. My name is Vadim Mazursky. I'm familiar with several of the people here, but personally, I bring to this table advocacy for disability rights and inclusion of people with disabilities and policymaking, especially with the police department and the history that's involved there. From a personal standpoint, I want to thank the mayor as well as the commissioners here for bringing together a diverse constituency of PSEP. I think we have varied backgrounds and various philosophies on how to communicate with the police department and the way going forward. What I've been glad in my time with PSEP to learn is how open everybody is to input from the public, input from the police bureau, as well as input from city employees and the Justice Department. I think PSEP has been doing a great job in bringing all those inputs together and formulating recommendations to the police bureau on ways to integrate those recommendations. So with respect to that, I want to echo what's been said today. There is a need to have more data. One of the recommendations made by PSEP in the past has been to have a trend as to how the data has changed over time, and that's been reflected today with Commissioner Fish and Commissioner Hardesty asking for that kind of data. As Commissioner Hardesty is fond of saying, we need a data-driven approach to decision-making, and I think that's absolutely correct. And so that's what we're looking for, and for accountability as well. The Police Bureau has done an admirable job of providing representatives at our meetings who can answer questions. The police chief has been there on several occasions, as well as the assistant police chiefs. And we do appreciate that. Sometimes questions are asked by the public, which we don't have the answers to, but we do have people at these meetings attending that have those answers, and I think that is very important, and I hope that presence continues. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your service. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I asked when you were in my office, of all the organizations listed that the police spend time with, my question was, what are the hardest meetings that Portland police officers go to in an effort to build community?
That's a new question.
That's the same one.
No, that's a new
I just
question.
expanded it a little.
You know what, I won't be able to, I'm gonna ask Officer Hansberger to come up here since you would know more about the advisory committee.
Well, the reason I asked is because, as you know, we talked. I know the African American Advisory Committee has been dysfunctional for almost 2 decades, and that it is really well attended. People don't know it happens. I'm sure that there are other committees that operate the exact same way. And so I get concerned when I see them listed as, oh, this is all the part of what we do. I understand the youth stuff, right? Because who wouldn't want to hang out with cute little kids and play sports stuff, right? But the hard work isn't the work hanging out with kids playing basketball. The hard work is really dealing with the racial history of policing in the city of Portland. And so when I look at where police are being paid overtime to invest time in the community, I'm very concerned that that doesn't match up to what we say our goal is, which is to build deeper relationships. I mean, playing ball with kids is fine, but that's not where the problems are. The problems are in how do we engage people who are adults. And so I would love to have a priority list, knowing that you can't do all these volunteer fun activities because you have limited staff. What are the priorities for this year? And how are you going to make sure that the right officers are at those events?
Okay, so that's a little bit of a different question.
That
And
is
yes-
a different question
And yes,
now,
you did,
right.
you did ask me that, so I won't have to call on you, Officer Hansberger.
No, I did ask you about
So,
what is the hardest
yes.
meetings you go to.
So
right?
acknowledging that some of these advisory committees do need revamping because some are more well-attended than others. But I also want to point out that there is there is cross-representation in some of these other groups as well. So just because one particular advisory committee is poorly attended does not mean that issues pertaining to that one particular demographic don't get raised at other meetings. But I will also acknowledge that, yes, we do need to go back, and I would like to go through all of them. And also, I mean, we have a lot of advisory committees, as do other bureaus as well. I'd also like to see how we can leverage our partnerships with the Office of Community and Civic Life as well, who also maintains advisory committees, to see if we could address all angles.
And I wanted to remind the listeners that this community engagement plan comes out of the 2012 settlement agreement, which was supposed to be done, 160 days after the settlement agreement was affirmed. So we are now in October of 2019. And it was supposed to be a plan that was led by the community, with input from the police, with input from community organizations that actually engage with the police. And so this plan was put together, and Chief, I stopped it before you came because they were trying to do it before we hired you, which I thought was stupid, and the mayor agreed, so we stopped it. So I just want the community to understand that this is not a Portland Police Bureau vision. This is something that was mandated by the DOJ, and it took us a very, very, very long time to even get to a draft. My concern is that, once again, this is led by the police and not led by the community. I went to one of the earlier community meetings that was supposed to be gathering community input into a community engagement plan, and I wasn't the only, everybody at that meeting was really ticked off because the way the information was presented made it sound like the facilitators had an outcome that they already had predetermined. And so all the people in East Portland who came to that particular meeting to actually have input into the community engagement plan left very frustrated. We were all promised that people would get back to us and we would actually have an opportunity to re-engage, and that did not happen. And so I just want that to be on the public record, that while I appreciate the beginning of a community engagement plan, it is not the plan that was envisioned by the Department of Justice or the community back in December of 2012. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think one more thing I forgot to mention that I think would be great to just highlight in the annual report. I think it was the annual report. Anyway, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that PSEP had proposed, I think this is a great way to address the historical legacy of racism in Portland, especially around policing and in all institutions here in Portland. And it's something that we look forward to helping work on in the future.
I hope that's going to be led by a community effort and not being led by the police.
Absolutely.
No.
That's my hope too.
Great. Does that finish your presentation? I just want to say this, first of all, Chief, thank you. And Lakiana and Vadim, I want to thank you. In large measure, you are the community representatives helping to drive that process, and I thank you for it. I do have sort of one surprise question for both of you.
Sure.
The last time we were in front of Judge Simon, he gave you accolades for the good work that you're doing on PSEF. He indicated that he thought you were demonstrating independence from myself as mayor, from Chief Outlaw and the Police Bureau, but he also indicated that he was somewhat concerned, and other members of the community indicated they were concerned that there wasn't more community involvement. People weren't showing up in the kinds of numbers that one would expect, and I know you've done things to try and encourage that. Where are you with that, and how can people get involved if they want to come and participate and hear what you guys are doing?
Yeah, we hold our meetings the last Tuesday of every month. Community engagement is a challenge, ongoing. It's something that we're working to do. Meetings like we're having tomorrow night, where we're engaging on topics that the community's interested in, are our way of doing that. And it's going to take some time. I think there was a lot of apprehension about where PSEP was going, and I think the best way we can do it is by producing results that the community is looking for. I think there could definitely be some support in the form of possibly a staff member. I know that it was part of some plan to maybe have a community organizer. Just in the work that we're doing every month, we're spending at least 20 hours of volunteer time, close to 20 hours, depending on, the month and the member. But that's at that level, just to bring everything together. Now to go out and do community engagement is, in addition to what we're already doing, is challenging. So I think a staff support or something like that would be helpful. But in addition to that, what we're already doing is working on the issues that the community cares about, and I think that'll address some of it as well.
Yeah, good. And I'll make this commitment again. I've already made it to you a couple of times, but I'll make it again. And I know Nicole Grant from my team, who's been heavily engaged in this. We want you to be successful for a lot of reasons. You establish your own agenda, which is something that people may not understand, so it really is a community-driven agenda. But we would like to see more active participation from the public at large. And I know you guys are really working hard and busting your chops on your own dime as citizen volunteers. So I want to thank you for that. And if you have proposals that you'd like to give to me that you think might further community engagement or community involvement, I will absolutely carry that to this council. And I think you would find a receptive audience.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, Vadim?
No, I definitely in my time, I've seen more people involved. In the last meeting, probably had about 50 community members. It comes and goes with respect to what's on the agenda. But for anybody out there listening, the website describes all of our meetings. If you just Google PSEP, it'll come up. And it's not just the people on the committee that are making these decisions and helping out. We gladly offer and accept the help of community members to sit on our subcommittees, to hear their voice and their participation, and to bring their background and knowledge to the table as well. So,
and before I get to Commissioner Hardesty, could you give us some idea what some of those subcommittees might be, just to potentially pique some people's interest?
Yeah, so we have the Policy Agreement Subcommittee. We have the Youth Subcommittee, which focuses on engaging youth, which, by the way, we have 2 youth members that sit on the committee, Race Ethnicity Committee, and then a committee for persons with mental illness. And so between the 4 of those, there's a lot of opportunity to get involved and for community members to sit on them, which they already do.
Thank you, appreciate it. Commissioner Hardesty.
I actually did not have an additional question. Thank you all, appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you. Great.
Thank you for your time.
So we have, we'll take testimony on the resolution. How many people do we have signed up?
Possibly 6.
Very good. 3 minutes each. Name for the record, please.
Okay. Are Jeanne and are Maggie here? They signed up. Okay, then we'll go with Dan Handelman, Debbie Iona, and Robert West.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler. I'm hoping, since we have so few people testifying, that maybe I can get 4 minutes to testify this afternoon.
3 minutes, please.
All right, thank you. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify about these important items. The 2018 annual report reads a little less like a public relations document than the 8-page infographic reports that came out in past years. To the Bureau's credit, they note the impact of 6 officer-involved shootings on the community, but they ignore the death in custody of Richard Berry. There are also no statistics about use of force, the main focus of the DOJ agreement. There are multiple mentions of policing protests, but none about PPB's use of force at those events. Unlike the IPR report, the Bureau does reference the OIR Group's 2018 report on deadly force incidents, but there are no specifics about the changes made to PPB practices as a result of that report. There are also no statistics on discipline. Even when those numbers appear in the IPR's report, the Bureau should put in those data and reference IPR for more details. PCCEP recommended this change as well. This is the first presentation of a PPB annual report to City Council since the DOJ agreement was finalized in 2014, even though it's been required by the agreement all of these 5 years. The precinct presentations were poorly promoted, poorly attended, and from what we heard, poorly run. As for the community engagement plan, another requirement of the DOJ agreement, we hope the city doesn't feel the meager efforts listed in the resolution today are sufficient community outreach to finalize the plan. It lists the specific days the Bureau engaged with PCCP at a few subcommittee meetings, which don't even have more than 1 PCCP member at them sometimes, and portions of the 2 full membership meetings, including one that took place 6 days after the resolution was drafted. We do appreciate, though, that the resolution recognizes City Council has to approve the plan, which is important since all of you are responsible for what the Police Bureau, how the Police Bureau functions. It is also good that the text leaves open the idea of modifying and updating the plan on an annual basis. It will be argued that PCCP meetings were the Bureau's public input efforts. However, Generally speaking, there are about equal numbers of community members and PCCP members at these meetings, about a dozen of each. It's indicative of the Bureau's poor understanding of community engagement that today's hearing was announced with 8 days' notice, which is not enough time to get more people here. The key recommendation that was mentioned is the plan for a Truth and Reconciliation Program. But what it actually says in the plan is they will actively engage with the mayor and city council, relevant bureaus, and other civic leaders to develop a work group to explore the creation of a Truth and Reconciliation Program. So that's 3 layers deep into the goal. And it doesn't acknowledge that truth and reconciliation can't come without the end of the behavior that leads to the process. In South Africa, apartheid fell, but no part of the community engagement plan promises to end police use of deadly force, racial and economic profiling, violent crowd control tactics, or other issues that are causing the rift between community members and the police. And I guess the last thing I would add is that the plan calls for the creation of a Hispanic Advisory Council. The old one disbanded after the officers who killed Jose Mejia Pote in a mental hospital in 2001 were given medals. And I think until that is reconciled, you should not get a new board together.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Good afternoon.
I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League shares the aspiration stated in the resolution that, quote, meaningful public engagement involves the ability of community members to affect policies, practices, and PPB culture, thereby improving outcomes and eliminating unconstitutional actions, end quote. We believe, however, that the Bureau could be doing more to connect to the public through its communication practices. The League has already shared with the DOJ, PPB staff, and the PCCEP our concerns about the methods the Bureau uses to inform the public. We believe there is room for improvement in the PPB's communications about important policy considerations, events, and opportunities for participation. As an example, when the annual report was scheduled for precinct presentations, a good place to start would have been reaching out through the email lists for the many PPP facilitated and participatory advisory committees listed in Appendix A. Connecting with these groups might have drawn a larger audience. After all, the annual report is meant to provide an overview of the Bureau's accomplishments and challenges, so it should be of interest to community members already associated with these advisory groups. The PPB also should consider adopting some of the techniques used by other city bureaus. Many provide sign-up sheets at community meetings where they gather contact information for future notifications. In addition, there are links on project websites where the public can sign up to receive information. When we shared our disappointment about the lack of notification for the precinct meetings, Bureau staff responded that the information was on the website and recommended signing up for the media alert system. The alert system requires creation of a password, a barrier for some. Furthermore, we understand that the alerts include media notices about criminal activity and are not necessarily devoted to the types of policy issues that interest members of the public who might want to provide feedback. We recommend that the Bureau build email distribution lists and use them in a tailored fashion to get the word out when there are opportunities to engage in policy discussions. It should be more proactive and intentional in its communication techniques rather than relying on members of the public to come to them to find opportunities to learn and participate. And at the last PCCEP meeting, I noticed that the 2 staff people from the Bureau are sworn police officers who are doing this work, and I wonder if the community engagement team would benefit from having somebody who is trained in, public outreach and communications in their office. Thank you.
Great. And Debbie, if I could just respond, because I think you've given us a very clear roadmap here and some great suggestions. First of all, I want to thank you as being one of the people who does show up on a regular basis, and you do participate, and I want to thank you for that engagement. I never want to speak for the chief. Her job is hard enough without me speaking for her, but I do know that they've made substantial changes to the PIO function recently in order to better engage with the community and provide additional information. And I think you have offered some very, very good suggestions here with regard to being proactive, being intentional, and building on the relationships we already have in advisory groups. And so I will take the notes you've written, and if you want to give me your written testimony, I'll make sure that we get that to the PIO, because I think they're good suggestions.
Sure, well,
All
thank
helpful.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Debbie. Good afternoon.
Yes, my name is Robert West. I'm with from the police, and I hope Joanne Hardesty pays really close attention to what I have to say. This thing about the gun violence reduction team that I keep hearing about is actually gang squad. I see them going out every night and pulling over people of color, searching their cars. There was a shooting in Southeast Portland on like 50th where it was a white shooting a white. There was no gun violence reduction team. The only detectives that showed up was people from the robbery division. And I still find the gun violence reduction team / gang squads still patrolling the same areas that they do when they're looking for gang members. I asked one of the officers, what's the difference between your job now and then? He goes, just the name. They switched it just because of the name. They're doing the same thing out there as they've been doing. And it's pretty sad when they sit there and they switch the name so that they can get people to sit there and say, hey, we got this nice new name, now will you support us? And it makes me mad when I sit there and I see a car pulled over and they want to search it because it's blacks. And then, I see cops pull over a white vehicle and it's like, well, you're speeding, you got your driver's license, go back to the car, run the name, go back, give them their driver's license and send them on their way. I've seen several times where they've sat there and said, we want to search for weapons. That's typically amongst the blacks and the Hispanics. You don't see that with the brew. I've very seldom seen the brew or EK that were stopped where their vehicles were searched. And gang task force doesn't even usually show up on those. But like I said, in Southeast Portland, a white guy shot a white guy in a robbery, and there was no gun violence reduction team that showed up. And that literally shocked me because, one of the detectives told me that they show up on everything, and they're not. They're showing up in areas of color. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
Last person who signed up is Charles Bridgetrain Johnson.
And is Charles the last? Carla?
Yes, he is.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon.
Amazing. Good afternoon. Thanks, y'all. And especially thanks to Clerk Carla or whoever, Chief Outlaw and her staff, who made this PDF look great even on the tiny screen of my phone. So it was good to hear that we've grown, that we respect the public enough to do a 20-some page PDF instead of, as was previously cited in the earlier testimony, a 8-page thing that seemed a little bit hackneyed to some people. This is important work, and one of the ways we know that it's important work is because one of the people that was killed by Portland police, Quanis Moose Hayes, has a family member here. I'd like to thank her for her diligence in working with the community and, for lack of a better phrase, working with the police department towards improvement and better accountability, and especially the prevention of violence and death from the hands of the people trained to protect and serve us. One thing that would be interesting, it's not necessarily the role of the police, maybe some of the organizations, whether it's League of Women Voters or Cop Watch, that maintain records about those people who have been killed by police, is to have the timeline, because I don't even recall if Chief Outlaw came in before or after any particular shooting, say the Qantas Moose Hayes shootings or others. So as we sit here in a city that may be going on its third or fourth one-time white borough mayor, we've had a single-term mayor with Sam Adams, we had a single-term mayor with Charlie Hales. Depending on what people believe about the ability of this town to have the police preferably live in this town and also live up to the community values, may determine whether we finally get a two-term mayor after however long it's been since we had one before. I especially appreciate Chief Outlaw's candor and directness in acknowledging that 6 of our neighbors died from shots fired by police. I'll have to talk with Mr. Handelman more about the other type of death in custody. I don't have the cop watch experience that Mr. West has to talk fully about his situation, but when I think about a Metro Guns task force, the first thing that comes to mind is that in this metro area, we had guns on the roof of a parking garage that were going to be aimed at me, and I don't know if any police officer identified and recorded the serial number of those guns, tracked their trafficking, knows if they were involved in other crimes. There was certainly probable cause to do so, to at least record the identity of those weapons, if not seize them. I hope that when we look at equity and racial considerations, we'll know how many guns were seized and tracked from people of color versus how many were seized and tracked from people that were not people of color. Thank you very much. I'm sorry my time's expired. PIO, milkshake, really? The PIO and the milkshake? There's definitely room for improvement there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chief. Did you have any other closing thoughts? Very good. I'll entertain a motion on the report.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Hardesty, a second by Commissioner Fritz. Please, this is the accepting the 2018 annual report of the Portland Police Bureau, item number 943. Please call the roll.
Fritz?
It's really great to get the report. I like its new format. It's very clear, and I particularly appreciate the reference in the report to a 2019 report coming fairly shortly. So I know that your intent is to get them back onto an annual basis in a timely manner. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the comments. Aye.
Hardesty?
I also want to add my thanks to the chief and her staff for actually developing a report that gives us an opportunity to really get a insight into the work and the day-to-day operations of Portland Police Bureau. I couldn't help but look at the annual report and have that open while I was reading the auditor's report about police overtime. And so as I look at both the gang violence, because the auditor's report is actually tracking gang violence that is being that Portland Police Bureau is responding to, and so I look at the over 50,000 in overtime that was spent around cases involving quote-unquote gang violence, and I also have to acknowledge the fact that if 58% of the arrests are of people who are houseless, we really need to change our priorities as far as the police force and actually focus on solving crime and actually not make people criminals who are suffering because they can't afford to live in our city. And so I vote aye, and I look forward to working with the chief to make this report better and to have it really reflect what's happening on the ground in our community.
Wheeler?
Well, I want to thank everybody in the Police Bureau who was responsible for collecting this data, for presenting it in a way that I think is fairly easy for people to digest. Again, this is a baseline. It will continue to improve with time. And if there's one disappointing thing, Chief, it's that you have to start somewhere. And so we don't have a lot of longitudinal data, particularly for areas where we're starting to collect data in a different way, or in some cases maybe collecting data for the first time. And this certainly came out in the response from the Police Bureau to the overtime audit, that we have actually engaged and started to do many of the data collection procedures that were actually identified as potential strategies in the audit. And so I want to applaud you and your command staff for being data-driven. And with time, what we will have is longitudinal data, and we'll be able to determine whether or not the investments we're making, the strategies we're pursuing, are actually the best and highest use to the limited resources, both dollars and cents and human resources that we have. And we'll see what results we are getting with those dollars. And so I appreciate your efforts there. I vote aye. The report's adopted. Next item is the Resolution 944 for the Community Engagement Plan. Please call the roll.
Fritz.
So Mayor Wheeler alluded to getting kudos from Judge Simon about the independence of the community oversight body. Some people don't know that part of the reason for that is that the staffing of that body is not only with assistance from his office, but also through the Office of Equity and Human Rights. Our work in that office is mostly internally focused and we've greatly appreciated working with Elle Weatheroy, the equity manager in the Portland Police Bureau, and the work that she's done with the Community Engagement Office. I think there's a great opportunity for more partnership between the Police Bureau and the Office of Community and Civic Life. Once they have reorganized their community safety program, we have lost a lot of the experienced people in that, working in that capacity. And so that is an obvious opportunity for more collaboration. But a community engagement plan is a framework. It's not a this and only this. It's a starting point. And essentially, I think we all agree that we want more people participating in every realm of city government, including police oversight. So thank you very much for the report and the plan. Aye.
Hardesty.
I thank Chief Outlaw and her team for putting together this community engagement program, even though it was supposed to be done in 2012. It is important to acknowledge that some of these community engagement activities are merely having ice cream or hanging out at a sports event with young people. Some are meaningful conversations that went through either race talks or some other formal process where we're actually really building really deep, honest relationships. It is my hope that the Bureau will prioritize where they will spend their time next year, because I don't believe you will be able to do everything that's in your community engagement plan. So the question is, what will benefit the community most, and how do you prioritize that over the year? I will vote to support this plan, but I will be monitoring it throughout the year to ensure that we're just not putting down numbers because Sunshine Division gives out X number of tons of food, that we're actually putting down work that we're actually involved in and responsible for. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
There is no bureau that receives more scrutiny than the Portland Police Bureau, and in order to rebuild the trust and expand the trust that already exists between the Police Bureau and the community, it requires the community to be actively involved. And I want to particularly applaud the individuals who have volunteered on the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Lakiana, who is here, Vadim, who is here, and many others who've participated in that process and volunteered their time and their energy and commitment to what is mostly a thankless but extremely important process. And so I want to acknowledge that and thank you. I think this plan is a good start, but as with the annual report we saw, it's a beginning step. It's the beginning, it's the base foundation of what I hope will be an evolving process, and it will become richer, it will become deeper, and it will become more meaningful as the community engages further and as that trust continues to build, because that's really the important thing here is trust. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted, and I thank everyone for their hard work on that. Next item, Commissioner Fritz.
Have we lost Commissioner Frisch for good?
You know, we have, so why don't we do this? Before we jump into 9:45, because it says that it's 2 hours, why don't we take 5 minutes?
That's what I was hoping.
Let's break in the middle of the next item as well, just so we all don't blow up. So. session. Carla, could you please read item number 945?
Yes. Amend the comprehensive plan map, zoning map, Title 33, Planning and Zoning, Title 18, Noise Control, Title 32, Signs and Related Regulations, to revise the multi-dwelling residential designations and base zones.
All right, so I'm going to break the good news and the bad news. The good news is you're all here and you look great. The bad news is we have 47 people who would like to testify, which is fantastic. We like to have that kind of community engagement, but realistically, we're not going to get through all of the testimony today. And I just want you to be aware of that possibility. My colleagues and I have said we will stay till 6 p.m. tonight. Then we have other commitments, but it's possible we won't be able to get everybody in today. And if that is the case, what we'll do is we'll set aside another time when those who have signed up who didn't get to testify get to go to the front of the line and testify first. So everybody will have that opportunity. If people decide they can't come back and they'd still like to submit testimony, we'll of course take written testimony if you don't get to speak today. But we've decided it's better to let everybody speak for 3 minutes, have their full say on this, then cut everybody short and try to cram it in, because even if we cut it short, I don't think we're going to be able to finish it today. So with that, item number 945. This afternoon, we're holding a public hearing on the Better Housing by Design recommended draft. Better Housing by Design is a key element of the Housing Opportunity Initiative, which is a suite of proposed actions to allow more types of housing that more people can afford to live in here in Portland. To help reorient everybody to the proposal, Better Housing by Design applies to land zoned for multi-dwelling. That's everything from 2-story townhouses to 10-story high-rises outside of the central city area. And while only about 8% of the city is zoned for multi-dwelling, this zoning is in locations close to services and it's close to transit, and it plays an important role in meeting our climate action plan goals. Better Housing by Design is intended to create climate-smart communities by enabling more people who can live within walking distance of commercial services and transit. Better Housing by Design is also intended to benefit working Portlanders, families, and people of color. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff is going to start us off today by providing a short presentation on Better Housing by Design. We'll then hear from the chair of the Planning and Sustainability Commission, Catherine Schultz. I want to recognize, first of all, the great work that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has been doing, and the staff, especially our Better Housing by Design project manager, Bill Cunningham, and our Planning and Sustainability Commission. We thank them. I commend the Bureau's work in gathering feedback from our community in order to develop and update this important proposal. The proposals help accelerate the construction of more affordable housing by offering incentives and bonuses so that different housing options are available for more Portlanders at all income levels. Director Durbin, I'll ask you to come up now. I'll turn it over to you and your staff before we open it up to public testimony. And just by way of housekeeping, since there are only 3 of us, none of us can leave the room. And so what we're going to do in order to maintain the quorum is in about an hour or so, we'll take a brief break and then we'll come back and everybody will have a chance to stand up and stretch a bit.
Unless nature requires it earlier time.
In which case, just raise your hand. Director Durbin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Andrea Durbin, Director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We appreciate being here today and having an opportunity to hear the public testimony. Over the last few years, we have rewritten the zoning codes for the full spectrum of Portland's residential development. We started with our fast-growing mixed-use centers and corridors, and then addressed central city housing. Now, through the Housing Opportunities Initiative, we are rewriting the rest, the multifamily housing, and later this year, single-family dwelling zones. The goal of these zoning code changes is, 1, to encourage the production of more and better housing, 2, to increase the range of housing choices, sizes, prices, and locations, 3, to encourage more housing in places that already have the services and amenities that benefit households, including along transit corridors, Fourth, to increase through bonuses the supply of affordable housing produced with new development. And lastly, to the best of our ability, to manage the risk of displacement from new development and growth by developing proactive strategies to support people staying in their neighborhoods. Better Housing by Design does this for multifamily housing, and this is where we will see most of our growth now through 2035. So with that, I'm going to introduce Bill Cunningham, who's the BPS lead for this, and he'll give a quick recap of this proposal.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm Bill Cunningham, project manager for the Better Housing by Design project. We will give a very brief presentation on the proposal so we can have time for the testimony. I wanted to first start out by providing some context for the code amendments that are before you. One issue we need to be aware of is that Portland is a growing city. We anticipate around 100,000 more households between now and 2035. And Portland's households have changed over the years. Back in 1920, when our inner neighborhoods were in the midst of being built, the average household size is about 4.5 people. Now it's about 2.5 people. So smaller households. In fact, about 68% of our households are just 1 and 2 people. We also have an increasing income gap. We have increases in high-paying jobs, increases in low-paying jobs. So that creates critical issues related to housing affordability. We have an aging population, and that raises new issues in terms of the accessibility of our neighborhoods and our housing so that people can stay in their communities as they age. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail, but income issues, I provided a handout that has some more information, but we wanted to give people some sense as to what we mean when we talk about affordable housing or what's affordable to people at various incomes. This on the screen, we have a number of income ranges from very low income up to 30% of the area median income. That includes a lot of retirees and fixed retirement incomes. An area of affordability that we're particularly focusing on is the up to 60% of the area median income. And for a single person, that's someone earning around $37,000 a year. It's about $17 or $18 an hour. And the people who are earning that include preschool teachers, nursing assistants, groundskeepers. So they're
One moment, Commissioner Harshney.
I just can't help but say thank you for this. I ask for this all the time because you're right. We throw around this term affordable housing as if affordable housing is the same for everybody, right? So thank you. This is a clear picture that helps me decide what's affordable for me.
And if I could just add that the thanks goes to the Housing Bureau who provided this graphic for us.
Thank them for me too.
Yes.
I always want this. I'm going to put this on my wall. Maybe I'll find it because it's a good model. Thank you.
Yep, and a thing we wanted to highlight for that 60% of area median income, when people talk about low income, what does it mean? And it's people pretty critical to our city. Again, the preschool teachers, nurses, assistants, many working class people. 80% AMI, or area median income, it varies depending on household size, but you're in that income level if you have two minimum wage income earners paying together into housing. So that's something to be aware of. One issue too is that what's considered affordable for that nursing assistant or preschool teacher is about $945 a month, but the average one-bedroom rent in Portland now is over $1,300 a month. So for these working class people, increasingly we don't have housing that's affordable to them. And that's something to bear in mind when we're talking about our proposals. Another dimension of affordability is looking at the cost of houses. The images and the image on the left is showing in blue dots what house sales were affordable to the average Portlander back in 2000. And back then, all those blue dots represent houses that were affordable to a median income household. Today, looking over to the right, the brown orange dots show what is not affordable. So you can see that much of the houses that have been sold are not affordable to your average Portlander. You have bits and pieces in East Portland, but not many.
Commissioner Harshney.
Thank you. I You know, we trade terms like on this handout is AMI, on this one it is MFI.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for the public to understand what the heck we're talking about when we switch back and forwards. And so I know median family income, and is that specifically in the city of Portland, or what is MFI?
The area median income is based on regional amounts, so it's not specific just to Portland, it's for the Portland region. And the federal government, HUD, sets some of those numbers.
Let me just recommend that you either use one or the other rather than interchanging them, going back and forwards.
No, I apologize about that. We're more frequently calling it area median income, and this is an old diagram. But the basic message is houses are out of reach for the majority of Portlanders now. And knowing that we have a broad range of household types, we know we need a broader range of housing opportunities for people. One thing we also know is that housing production hasn't kept up with the growth in the numbers of households in Portland. So more people vying for not enough housing does drive prices up.
I just wanted to make a comment. I couldn't Google it quite so fast because I was really surprised to see that the example for $74,000 was an elementary school teacher, because my daughter-in-law is one, and that she doesn't make sense. So the range for a Portland Public School teacher is $49,000 to $72,000. So depending on your age, and I think this is part of the point you were making as well, that we've got an aging population, but then on the other hand, we've got young people who are just starting in their careers, who maybe are just starting families as well. So we need a whole range of different kinds of options.
Yes, it's the danger of having a simple diagram because, disclosure, my wife is a school teacher, and I know that if you're starting out as an elementary school teacher, you're probably not earning that much. But moving on, so that's some of the context, the lack of affordability, smaller households. One issue to be aware of is this project's focusing on the multi-dwelling zones in Portland. It's only 8% of the city's land area. And in this diagram, it's showing in blue where the multifamily zones are. Red is showing where our commercial zones are. So it's a tiny part of the city, but you can kind of see it's coursing along our corridors. So 86% of our multi-dwelling zoning is within a quarter mile of transit streets, and much of it is also close to our commercial services. So it's pretty key to our climate action plan goals for allowing more people to be living within walking distance of where services are, where transit is, so you have more options for getting around with not necessarily being dependent on driving. Want to highlight the general approach of the project. There are two major approaches that are part of this proposal. One is really about expanding housing options for all sorts of households. It's about expanding the diversity of our housing types in the multi-dwelling zones, and a key part is addressing affordability, knowing that that's a critical issue at this time. We're not only thinking about numbers in terms of numbers of units, it's about improving the design, making sure that when we have housing, it supports the livability of people living there. And it also supports our community objectives for integrating development with with neighborhoods, providing walkable neighborhoods where it's easy to walk around. So that's something to bear in mind. It's a general approach is we're providing more flexibility for more units on our typical multi-dwelling sites, but there's a big focus on the way that's designed. One example of what we're doing related to housing diversity is these sets of images are showing some pre-1950s multifamily in Portland housing. And Portland had a pretty diverse array of housing back before modern zoning came in. And they're predominantly fairly low-rise. One issue, though, is in our most common zone, the current R2 zone, only the duplex could be built. It's a zone intended for low-rise development, but the eightplex and the courtyard apartments can only be built in about a small minority, about 8% of our multifamily zoning. And we're proposing to bring back some of those possibilities, to regulate by the scale. For having a low-rise zone intended to be about a fairly neighborhood scale, all these would typically be allowed.
I don't understand that, Bill. Could you just explain that more? Because you can do, if you've got big enough sites in the R2 zone, you can have as many units as you've got site area for.
Yes, that's true, but the densities we have here, which are fairly small lots, could not be built in our multi-dwelling zones.
So that's what you're proposing to change, is the density rather than
Right, the
necessarily
scale
the housing
stays
type.
the same, but there's more flexibility for the housing types. And this does relate to affordability. The next slide is highlighting what's typically built in our close-in neighborhoods in our most common zone, the R2 zone. And on a 5,000 square foot lot, for example, your maximum density is a pair of units. And typically you're getting a pair of attached houses, row houses. You know, they're an important urban housing type, but they become very inexpensive and very expensive in Portland. You're talking 500,000, 600,000, sometimes 700,000, depending on how large they are. And so that's really serving a pretty small span of our community in terms of who benefits from that zoning. You're going to have a lot of money. It's probably at least 150% of AMI. Now, the amendments would, in these low-rise zones, allow more units. And the example on the right is showing 1,000 square foot units on the same size site as the others. It's a corner lot, 5,000 square feet. And these are $380,000 compared to the 600,000 or so. And this becomes affordable to an average income or slightly below average income two-person working household. That square footage actually happens to be about the same size as the Cape Cods that were built after World War II that actually did accommodate families. So that's the critical piece here. The idea is we're opening things up for other mixes of low-rise housing.
Just for just a sec.
Commissioner Fritz, then Commissioner
The price per square foot is more on the townhouses. And I agree, because my first home here was about that size of square foot, and we grew out of it as our family expanded. So I think that's really important. I want to make sure that we're going to have family housing in Portland as well as affordable housing. I don't think the two should be mutually exclusive.
A key thing about the proposals to bear in mind is you would still be able to do these smaller numbers of attached housing development, but we would be opening up allowances so you could do other types as well. So that's something, and we did some economic analysis. Basically, both smaller unit types and larger unit types would be economically feasible. So with the changes, we'd probably see a mix of both these types. But the main move is opening up opportunities so that you could have greater numbers of smaller units along with the large townhouse development that typically gets built today.
Well, if I'm a developer, I'm going to go for 6 at 380 because that gets me nearly 20,000. 2 million, whereas the two of the larger ones gets me half that.
There's a lot of money to be made for expensive attached housing. So it's in terms of a square foot cost of construction and profit, they're not that different. It starts getting different when you do have more studio or very small units. But what we've seen up to now in the zones that allow this broad range, we get a mix of all the types. Just one issue is those townhouses, they're in the RH zone. Those 6 units on that 5,000 square foot site could only be built in that highest density RH zone. That could not currently be built in our low-rise multifamily zones. So this would change things and open up basically the spectrum of people who could benefit from new housing in those zones.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have seen houses in inner Northeast that are these teeny tiny townhouses that start between $600,000 and $800,000, and that's before we make any changes to zone. What's to prevent? I think, as Commissioner Fritz alluded to, that all of these 6 units would end up being $800,000 or more. What would prevent that?
Based on the economics, it simply pencils out to do less expensive units. All the analysis we've done in terms of how much do smaller units cost in the same area compared to larger units indicate
But you're
that the
missing my
smaller units are less
question. So
expensive.
if I'm a developer, it may make sense for me to build cheaper units, but it may not make sense for me to sell cheaper units. So again, I could build it cheaper because I can now build 6 where I was only building 2. But what's to prevent me from charging as much money as I think I could possibly get from that unit? Who would stop me from doing that? Because again, I see these sizes right now in inner Northeast, and they are on the market for $800,000. And I don't know who these people are, but people are buying them.
Right. That's a good question. We can't entirely control what the market might do. We've heard from some builders is that because of land costs and the limited number of units you could do, they have very little choice but to do very expensive units. Having a broader range of units does create a situation where a broader range of potential buyers could be customers for that housing. I do want to highlight that one thing that this project does too is related to development bonuses. In all the zones, there's a constraint on what you could do in terms of by right base scale allowances. And what this project...
I'm sorry, would you repeat? Did you say something about developer bonuses?
Yes, I was about to talk about some of the bonuses that are more directly tied to providing affordable units. We have basically a base entitlement where in any of our zones there's a limitation for what scale you could provide. And if you want to go to a larger scale, and for example, in our corridors, you could not really get to a full 4-story scale unless you use development bonuses. And those development bonuses are tied to basically outcomes that implement our policy objectives. And the primary way you get to a bigger scale is providing affordable units. We're increasing our inclusionary housing bonuses for affordable housing, which provides housing affordable at 60 to 80% of area median income. But the greatest bonuses, the biggest priority bonuses, are really aiming at that 60% of area median income. These are things that more directly get beyond just what the private sector might do, but link to ensuring that affordable units are included when you go bigger with development. And we did some economic analysis about this too, and it indicated that if you're going bigger and you're including inclusionary housing, even at 60% of area median income, it pencils out at these low-rise densities. It's economically feasible. I also wanted to highlight that we know that it could be difficult to fit 3-bedroom family housing bonuses in these compact sites. So there is a bonus too that's oriented towards 3 bedrooms that are affordable at moderate incomes. So that would be something where we're prioritizing development outcomes that are more affordable. We also have an allowance where if you commit to preserving existing affordable housing, sometimes what people call naturally occurring housing, you could transfer development rights to another site, go bigger elsewhere. So there's a linkage to preserving affordable housing. Another thing that we have is a bonus through which, if you're providing accessible units, and of course helping to meet the needs of our aging population, our disabled population, you would get some bonus to help encourage that. Most of our permits in our multi-dwelling zones don't require accessibility, so we're looking at some tools that can increase physical accessibility. But the biggest priority is getting affordable housing in. So generally, commissioners, there's an allowance for a broad range of unit configurations without strings attached. But if you want to go bigger, it's tied to delivering on affordability, accessibility, key priorities like that. I'm going to move on to the components that are more about the design side of things. One thing we're doing is expanding some of our outdoor space requirements, including requiring common areas, courtyards for large sites. And this really relates to things we heard in terms of outreach that had happened with tenants, with residents of multifamily. These are important things for especially families. One thing we've been trying to address is a lot of people assume that apartments only have single people living in them. East Portland especially, there are a lot of families with kids. The numbers we have show that about half of our Hispanic and African American communities have families living in apartments. So can't assume that apartments don't have families. And one of the ideas, as more people live in multifamily, with houses being out of reach, the thought is everyone should have access to outdoor space. You shouldn't have to afford a house to be able to have access to outdoor space. There's also a new flexibility for parking. It's optional in more cases. Building design and scale is another thing that's being paid attention to. There's greater limits on front garages and tying in the design of buildings to typical neighborhood context. So part of the idea is we'll be getting more development in these areas, but we want them to contribute to our design goals for pedestrian-oriented neighborhoods. And there also are transitions when you have the higher density zones next to single-family zones. Another key component is related to East Portland, where we had a particular focus. It's an area of town that hasn't always had a lot of focus, and we're really trying to have regulations that responded to some of the strengths of the area. And one proposal is to keep the centers of the area's large blocks more open. That's often where the Douglas fir groves are. There's also regulations intended to facilitate street connections, which are sorely lacking in that part of town. So as development happens in the multi-dwelling zones, we'd be expanding options for getting street or pedestrian connections in there. We also have several changes related to historic districts and right-sizing the zoning so that the base and bonus scale is roughly in alignment with the scale of larger historic buildings in the area. There's some changes to our zoning mapping to achieve this, as well as other regulations. In some cases, we're reducing the scale somewhat. Other cases, we're actually increasing the allowed scale. In fact, that historic building on the right is in an area where the multi-dwelling zoning only allowed buildings of about half that scale. So there's a right sizing that happened here in the highest density multi-dwelling zones in historic districts. Just to wrap up here, again, the two major things we're doing is expanding housing options, greater diversity of unit types, focus on affordability, but also focusing on design. And that's what we have, and I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Great, thank you, Bill. And next, I want to introduce Daisy Quinones, who's the commissioner from the Planning and Sustainability Commission.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. Dear City Commissioners, Mayor Wheeler, again, my name is Daisy Quinones. I'm the Youth Commissioner appointed to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. Thank you for having me today to speak on better housing by design. Just a little heads up, I'm feeling a little under the weather, so if you hear some sniffles, I apologize. The Planning and Sustainability Commission is pleased to forward our Better Housing by Design recommended draft. The Better Housing by Design zoning code amendments make fundamental changes to Portland's multi-dwelling zones that will help our city meet its future housing needs, including new incentives that prioritize affordable housing. Better Housing by Design works together with Residential Infill Project as part of a broader housing opportunities initiative to update the zoning code to expand housing options and address housing affordability while developing strategies to minimize displacement. We at the Planning and Sustainability Commission believe that development in multi-dwelling zones is important for allowing more people to live close to services and transit, and the proposals include appropriate mitigation measures that will help address Portland's need for affordable housing, especially for low-income households here in Portland who face the greatest challenges finding housing that they can afford. As someone who grew up living in apartment complexes in East Portland, I'm really excited about the changes Better Housing by Design aims to bring. I'll speak to two today really briefly. First, Better Housing by Design, as mentioned, will increase the diversity of housing options in our multi-dwelling zones through incentivizing the development of affordable units. This will help create housing and keep housing affordable for families such as my own growing up. Secondly, I'd like to share, as a kid growing up, my friends and I often found ourselves playing in the parking area of our apartment complexes, which was quite dangerous if you think about it. There was little recreational space either within our unit or in the complex. And also, our parents were often really hesitant to let us walk to the park, either because we would have to cross major roads like 122nd Avenue, or we would have to walk along roads that lacked sidewalks. Unfortunately, there is still quite a lack of sidewalks in East Portland today, but that's a topic for another day. Better Housing by Design's outdoor space and green element standards will create spaces for play, recreation, fresh air, and outdoor enjoyment to the many current and future Portland families who choose to or have no option other than to live in our multifamily dwelling zones. The Planning and Sustainability Commission recommends the Better Housing by Design zoning code and map amendments to help meet the housing needs of Portlanders and will advance our city's equity objectives. These amendments provide new regulatory tools that will help expand our housing options, facilitate the development of affordable housing, foster design and outdoor spaces that support quality living environments for residents, and provide new tools for creating needed street connections in areas that lack them, such as East Portland. Thank you for the opportunity to participate as part of the review of this project and for considering our recommendations.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Next up, I sort of got it wrong on the logistics of today's run of show. So I indicated there were 47 people signed up. Quite a few of them are actually on invited panels, so there was some overlap here, and I apologize for that.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Just before you call the next
Sure.
panel up, I just want to appreciate our youth representative on the commission. I wish I had been that poised and that knowledgeable when I was a young person. It just absolutely fascinates me, your grasp of what the issue is and how it's going to impact folks in our community. I live in East Portland as well. And so I just couldn't let you leave without saying thank you so much for your willingness to serve and for your clear understanding of what the issues are and what the challenges are. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And the rest of you were great too, but I just had to.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. We appreciate it. Next up, we're going to hear from some other city commissions. Daniel Newberry from the Urban Forestry Commission and Kristen Miner from the Historic Landmarks Commission. You're our next panel. Thanks for being here.
I'm curious if we're going to hear about the report that was done. I kind of feel like we're doing this backwards. There was an excellent study done by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on the historic context of racist planning in the city of Portland. So I'm just kind of wondering where that is on the agenda.
Director Durbin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner. Our plan is actually to bring that report when we bring residential infill and the discussions, which will start in December, because the report that we just issued, Racist History of Zoning in Portland, really looks at the single-family dwelling zones. And so that'll be the conversation we will start when we bring that code package up, zoning package change in December.
That's unfortunate, because I actually think that your report is an excellent report. My first question was, did you tell the truth? And when you read the report, it is clear you did. I think that report actually is the frame under which all the actions that we're taking around housing over the next few months, this is actually the frame as to why we're doing all the stuff that we're doing. So I think it may be a missed opportunity for those who are here today that we're not setting the context for why are we doing this.
Yes, well, we certainly, through Better Housing by Design, we are addressing some of the inequities that we're seeing in the city from this history, particularly looking at affordable housing option and providing more opportunities and different additional units and developments and multifamily in the multifamily zones. And really, I appreciate that. We appreciate your recognition of this report. Our staff did a great job of working on this. We do want to have that conversation with the council when we talk about residential infill, because it really provides kind of the basis for the history of the single-family dwelling zones and how they were established and how they've been spread across the city and why we need to make changes to them today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Could I ask just a procedural question? You mentioned 3 minutes per testimony. On the website, it said 2 minutes.
I'm not sure why that would be. Historically, what we do is we offer people 3 minutes, and if we
Okay.
don't have time, we'll cut it to 2. And if we're really desperate, we'll cut it down to 1. But this is such an important issue, and we're not particularly rushed in terms of needing to get these plans approved anytime soon. And so we, on balance, we just think it would be better to give people a little extra time, that
Good.
3
We can
minutes.
talk more slowly.
But I will say this, if somebody says something you've already said, you don't need to go into depth. You can just say, like whoever said, I agree on X, and move to the next point.
Yep.
You bet.
Please. I'll begin.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, members of the Portland City Council. My name is Daniel Newberry. Policy Committee Chair for the city's Urban Forestry Commission, and I also live in East Portland, like many of the other people here today. First, we'd like to thank Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and Planner Bill Cunningham in particular for including many of our requests for changes into the current draft. As affordable housing is a major goal of this plan, it's important that low-income residents enjoy the health and heat island reduction benefits trees provide at home, as do Portland's wealthier residents, many of whom live in tree-rich neighborhoods. We can have both affordable housing and large trees in our city. Please do not approve additional exemptions from tree planting and preservation requirements for affordable housing reasons. Title 11 exempts affordable housing projects from the tree preservation and planting standards that most other development projects must meet. These exemptions further exacerbate the inequities associated with tree-deficient neighborhoods. This really is an issue of equity. Limiting impervious area in development situations is important for preserving future space for large form trees and for protecting existing trees. We like the provision of limited asphalted parking area to 15% of the site, and we urge the City Council more broadly to enact impervious surface limitations that would apply to future developments in all zones and plans. We are concerned about the proposed flexible landscaping provisions with the requirement that at least 50% of the landscaping be in-ground. We fear that these provisions will further encourage the payment of fees in lieu of tree preservation and planting that are allowed by Title 11. However, we could support the proposal with an additional requirement that Title 11 tree density standards are met by planting trees rather than simply just paying in lieu fees of tree planting. We support the proposal to allow transfer of development rights to protect trees. This mechanism does have the potential to save existing large trees, so the Urban Forestry Commission supports these development rights as long as they do not otherwise limit space for large form trees. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on better housing by design and for adding elements to the plan to promote green spaces.
Thanks, Commissioner Newberry. Commissioner Fritz.
Have you sent in your testimony, please?
I can leave this.
Yeah, if somebody could send it to the clerk, or she can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you had. I took some notes.
Great. Commissioner Minor, welcome.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come as invited testimony. My name is Kristen Minor. I'm the chair of the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission. And I'm here to present a letter from my commission about this project. We have definitely been working on this for some time, just hearing different briefings, and I have to say this project has come a long way, and I want to commend the work that Bill Cunningham and that the PSC has done on this.
PSC is the Planning and Sustainability.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I do have a couple of extra copies if any of you would like to follow along, but I'm not going to quote or read from my letter today. I hope that you do take the time to actually read it. Thank you. In the interest of time, I am going to skip over quite a number of actually what I consider to be hurrah moments. These are things that are really worth calling out and that are significant and that we support. So my apologies. I am going to skip over to covering a couple of issues that we'd like to raise today. One of those issues is it's kind of in three parts, and on page 2 and 3, I have our concerns listed as bullet points. So starting with bullet point 2, 3, and 4, I'm going to cover those together as the first issue, and those all relate to how the Landmarks Commission does its work in historic districts. What we do there is assess a new project in terms of its compatibility with the existing historic pattern, height and scale, and then the finer level details. So regarding that,
First, the code does not currently do a very good job of alerting applicants that some projects might not reach their maximum height or bulk if they're not compatible. And so our first point is really that changing terms that are currently maximums in the code to by right or base makes that even less clear for applicants. And so I think what we're asking for is that in historic districts, that there be more alerts or, more kind of provisions in the code that actually specifically mention that you have to meet those compatibility standards. Next, that extra FAR, which is the bulk of a building, earned by affordable housing projects, I would say that this is not the right incentive to use within historic districts for that very reason, that sometimes it's hard for a project even to meet the maximums, let alone extra that's earned for a project. And so what I would suggest, and what the Landmarks Commission would suggest, that if we have to say no to some extra earned area of bulk, that at least that developer could then incentivize it and transfer it out of the district. I don't want to see us in the position of having to say no to a developer of an affordable housing project and leave them with nothing. So at least that would give them some monetary incentive to transfer out. And then finally, there's a recently added provision in this, sorry, what's it called?
Excuse me, so is your recommendation that basically historic districts stay the same and every other part of the city changes? Is that what you're recommending to us?
Not at all. We support increased density in historic districts. The problem is that we look at case-by-case basis. So when we're assessing whether something is going to fit in, we really do have to look at the historic buildings there. And so not every project is going to fit in. We do our best to approve as much bulk and height as we can, but there are going to be projects that just won't fit into a historic district.
Which is why I really wish we'd had the other report first, right? Because, if you're talking about the context of how we develop land use policy, who benefited from that land use policy, and where we're moving in the future, I am very concerned that we are just solidifying the racially segregated housing policy first, and then we go and talk about, now let's figure out how to not displace people after we've already confirmed that the racist policy is fine and we're just going to keep it status quo. So that's what I'm hearing. And if I'm mishearing, then please share with me what it is I'm missing, because that's what I'm hearing sitting here.
Well, Commissioner, I would suggest that some of our historic districts and conservation districts are exactly those areas where low-income people live. So I'm going to point to the Chinatown, Japantown, for instance, which historically has always been an area where low-income people, immigrants, first landed in our city. And that has quite a few old buildings that are protected because they're in a historic district.
Okay, that's one.
Okay, Elliott is a conservation district. That's part of, the core of Albina that has multiple conservation districts. And so all of those protect buildings that in many cases have nothing to do with white ownership or wealth. Of course, there are wealthy historic districts. We agree with that, but this is kind of across the board. Preservation is not just about being white or wealthy.
Well, but I live in East Portland, right? We're not talking about preserving anything in East Portland. We're seeing that as an area of economic opportunity for developers. And so I'm just trying to, and believe, and I support a lot of the work that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is doing. So this is not a criticism of the work. But I feel like this conversation is not happening in the context of how public policy around land use planning has detrimentally impacted communities of color. And so when I hear about let's preserve these historic districts, all I hear is let's just keep status quo in place, and oh, we got a plan for East Portland, which says to me that 10 years from now, people of color will no longer be in East Portland, right? If that's the only place that we're talking about major development taking place. So I'm just concerned about voting on whether or not the status quo makes sense based on the new vision that we have about how we're moving land use plan. And I do understand the difference between residential and multifamily housing and how small that is. So unless we're doing something else fundamentally different, and which would mean historic districts would look different than they look today, I don't see how we ever get to the housing goals that we say we have.
So if I might just interject, the
Commissioner Fritz.
percentage of Portland's total land area in historical conservation districts is 3%, and the percentage of multifamily zoning in historical conservation districts is 4%. Commissioner gave us a couple of examples of areas that if we destroy the Elliott district, for example, if we destroy the Lair Hill district, which is also from immigrant and low-income families, if we provide incentives to get rid of those structures, we're not getting any more of those structures. That's the nature of a historic district, is you cannot replicate this. It's no longer historic if it just looks like what was there before. So I think it's, and I know actually I was telling myself I would stop commenting because I know we've got a lot of people who want to testify and I'm here to listen to you. So I will stop commenting, but I just wanted to put that in. Interject that.
I appreciate the complexities that we have to deal with. So, but I just wanted to just make sure that the record reflected that that's what I hear. So unless I'm missing something, then we're still going to have inequalities built into our land use system at the end of the day. And that troubles me.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to say about the kind of FAR and height issue that is currently proposed in the code, or the BHBD, is that there's a recently added provision that transfers can be allowed into historic districts. And again, we do see that as increasing confusion, especially when there are going to be those inevitable cases where it's not going to be compatible and we have to say no and it'll increase the numbers of appeals. So we would like to limit that to not allowing transfers into historic districts. My second sort of overall or major point is that it's really I guess, a plea to take sustainability seriously. It is our responsibility to push more adaptive reuse and allow less demolition, especially of older buildings that were constructed of materials made to last over 100 years. So we seek, at a minimum, a penalty for demolishing a contributing building in a historic or conservation district. And I know that this has been talked about as part of both better housing and the residential infill, and it's not currently in better housing. I think this is something that could easily be included, and it would overall cause demolitions to decrease and for us to push more towards adaptive reuse.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, I have to play microphone cop because I want to get, we have 3 invited panels that are mostly a subset of the 47 people who signed up. But I want to be respectful of the fact that there's a lot of people who are here who are not on the panels. So I'm going to ask panelists, we really want to hear your input, but can you keep your testimony to 3 minutes? Can you try to to make your case as strongly as possible in 3 minutes or less. So we now have invited testimony from people and groups who've been involved in the Better Housing by Design planning process, some people from the very beginning, and many of whom who know what successful implementation looks like. The first group involves people who are involved in building the housing we need. So we have Julie Livingston from Home Forward, Mike Beamer from Green Hammer, and Nick Savi from Rose Community Development Corporation. He did. Okay, that doesn't surprise me knowing Nick. He's got 25 irons in the fire. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners Fritz and Hardesty, it's very nice to be with you this afternoon. I am representing Home Forward today. I'm a project manager at Home Forward and am a developer of affordable housing. As Bill explained in his presentation, the multi-dwelling zones are well connected to schools, parks, job centers, commercial centers, and multimodal transit. As a result, they are great locations for households of all sizes, all incomes, all phases of life. And Better Housing by Design is a game changer for affordable housing developers. To illustrate the significance of the impacts of Better Housing by Design, I analyzed the before and after capacity of a 5-acre parcel that Home Forward owns in Northeast Portland. And 5 acres is a lot of land. There aren't many parcels of this size in these zones. But this is in fact 7 lots that have been aggregated into a single site. The site is currently zoned R2. It will transition to the RM1 when Better Housing by Design is adopted. If this site were to be redeveloped, the base zone density calculation would change. The existing R2 allows a maximum of 115 housing units. The proposed RM1 raises that to 220. And because the new calculation methodology is flexible, this number can be finessed by changing assumptions about unit sizes. A density bonus for inclusionary housing would be available, and Home Forward would certainly provide housing units for households at or below 80% of area median income. The existing R2 bonus allows for a boost to 144 housing units. The proposed RM1 bonus takes that number to 330 housing units. The RM1 offers an additional bonus for deep affordability that isn't available in the R2. Deeply affordable units serve households at or below 60% of area median income. These are units that are largely financed with low-income housing tax credits, and they are the bread and butter of Portland's affordable housing development community. Home Forward would be able to increase density on this site by a further 50% to 440 units if we were to redevelop it. So I've represented Home Forward on the Technical Advisory Committee for the past 3 years, and I'm excited that Better Housing by Design is about to go live. Bill Cunningham has done an excellent job of soliciting and responding to feedback from a great variety of stakeholders. Cultivating affordability and livability have been front and center in his work, and he's been thoughtful and thorough in his evaluation of the galaxy of standards that impact housing development. In addition to density, standards for parking, building height, setbacks, and outdoor and community spaces have been simplified and right-sized. Better Housing by Design is a milestone in the development of prosperous, healthy, equitable, and the resilient Portland we all want, a city truly designed for people, and I hope that you are able to support it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I'm trying to follow you when you say that you could increase housing if RM1 zoning by 50%. Why would you be able to do that just because of the zone change?
The calculation for density changes significantly when we transition from the existing code to the new code. So right now, density is described as the number of housing units allowed per square footage of site area.
Okay.
In the future, it's a totally different calculation that is based solely on the site area and how it is extruded.
And how tall it is?
Yeah, so the amount of square footage that we can put on the site in the future increases dramatically. How we spend it is up to us. We can build studios, 1s, 2s, 3s. It's just square footage.
And so building at 60% means a family of 4 would have to make $52,000 a year in order, around that, in order to be able to afford a property. An individual would have to make $37,000 a year at 60% of area median income.
Yes, or have a voucher to assist.
And are you anticipating?
If that unit is at 60%, it is possible to build units for lower than 60% of area median income.
If you have vouchers or some other financial
Some other
assistance?
subsidy that supports units at, say, 30% of area median income. Everything Home Forward does is below 60%.
Thank you. That's helpful.
You bet.
Thank you. Hey, Mike.
Hello, my name is Mike Beamer. I'm an architect with Green Hammer, a local design build firm focused on zero energy buildings and missing middle housing. We have followed the development of Better Housing by Design proposal through its evolution and support the proposal. We have analyzed the proposal through multiple case studies and have found the proposed changes have a positive impact. The shift to an FAR-based system allows greater flexibility in the type and number of housing units developed, which will allow for a greater variety of the housing options in these zones while maintaining an appropriate scale. The properties we have studied would be more likely to be developed and would include more housing units, including regulated affordable units, if the proposal is adopted. We support the restructured bonuses, which prioritize affordable housing and family-sized units. We also support the addition of small-scale commercial use on major corridors. We find the overall package of proposals to be well considered and represent a significant improvement to the zoning code and encourage the council to adopt the package. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Next group are community partners. We have Doug Armstrong from the East Portland Action Plan, Alan Delatorre, Vivek Chandas, and Danny Ledesma from the Portland Public Schools. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Sir, would you like to go ahead and start?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Armstrong, and I'm testifying on behalf of the East Portland Action Plan. As you know, the East Portland Action Plan represents a comprehensive, community-driven effort to promote livability, improve the built environment, and stabilize low-income communities in East Portland. Staff from the BPS have met with EPAP and its committees at every stage of development of Better Housing by Design to ensure that the proposal you're now considering supports your goals and ours for East Portland. BHBD requires new affordable homes for low income and incentives for very low income families, incentivizes the preservation of existing affordable homes, and encourages the creation of more intentionally affordable for sale housing than is typically available in our city. The proposal measures new buildings by FAR, which is something EPAP supports because it encourages development of housing units appropriate to larger families, which is an area of significant unmet need in East Portland. The proposal also supports East Portland families by retaining the current outdoor space requirements. We would like to see a requirement for common areas in all zones in new multi-unit developments. Under BHBD, new apartment projects will include rear setbacks. We would ask that 25% of the rear setback not be allowed to be paved and that 50% of the rear setback should not be allowed to be used as a vehicle use area. The proposal would also support our struggling families by allowing daycares in all multi-dwelling zones. The proposal incentivizes accessibility for residents and visitors, helping seniors and people with disabilities to live independently within the community they currently call home. BHBD includes a number of new design standards that recognize the unique built environment in East Portland, another key piece of the mandate that underlies the East Portland Action Plan. Every element I've mentioned is specifically called out in the East Portland Action Plan, approved by this council more than a decade ago. I have provided you with a matrix, page 2, that shows the relevant sections of the EPAP plan, and it's great to see that the goals identified by our community a decade ago will be given life in the form of new code language. BHBD is not a panacea, and we all know that zoning and design standards can't do everything we want for our community. They won't solve our affordability crisis. Still, these code changes move the needle substantially for East Portland, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I have to say bravo on the matrix. Somebody put a lot of time and energy into that.
We sat down with all the paperwork, as Joanne, I'm sure, is well aware of. We've got a lot of it, and we found many, many points that meshed with what we were trying to do in East County.
Thank you, and thanks for the community barbecue a few weeks ago. That was fantastic.
You're welcome. Next year will be better.
Excellent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Vivek Chandis. I'm a professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University, and I direct the Sustaining Urban Places Research Lab. We've been involved with Better Housing by Design from the beginning when we were asked to participate in a project that looked at it scientifically, trying to bring a data lens to it. And so what we did essentially was we started with this idea that the building stock in the city is one of the most essential components for dealing with climate stressors that communities face. And one of the biggest climate stressors that I've been looking at is urban heat in the region. And we found that East Portland gets the double whammy: summertime heat, wintertime floods, and especially communities that have been historically underserved are those that are most disproportionately impacted. And so what we did with Bill Cunningham and the team early on was to essentially use a computational fluid dynamics model.
Say that 3 times.
Yeah, there you go. Which is an off-the-shelf model designed in Germany and has rarely been applied to any urban developments, particularly in the policy realm. So we really broke some pretty serious research ground in taking the scenarios that Bill and the design team had put together. We digitized those, and we are running these models to basically see what would be the impact on communities in terms of their experience of the temperature during heat waves that are increasing in intensity, frequency, and duration. And what we are finding is that there are several design considerations that would be very beneficial to keeping the temperature, in fact, at or below the higher density levels. This was a breakthrough for not only the field, but it was a real breakthrough for the design team at BPS to see that, yes, we can increase density and also keep temperatures at or even below what it was prior to the development. And so part of what we're seeing in terms of the reduction in surface parking, what we're seeing in terms of the front setbacks, what we're seeing in terms of the preservation of trees on the site is largely based on some of the outputs from these models. And so early on, those discussions were seeded. Those were then taken out to the community. They're in Appendix C, I believe, of the overall Better Housing by Design document. I would be remiss if I didn't say this based on the questions that came up earlier from Commissioner Hardesty, was as part of a different project, we looked at 108 cities across the country, looked at historic redlining maps that were digitized, and we wanted to see what the temperatures were of those areas that were historically redlined. This is over 80 years ago, to what the current temperatures are in those areas in comparison to the areas that weren't redlined. And of the 108 cities, I was absolutely flabbergasted when I found that Portland was number 1 on that list. The hottest areas of Portland are those areas that were historically redlined. And so not only did the services not make their way into those areas at that time, they're now disproportionately affecting the communities. And with this project, I would like to at least plea to you not only to support it, but to take into consideration climate in all future development projects. Because once these things go in, they're going to be there for 50, 80, 100 years. And what happens to the planet and what happens to the city in 50, 80 to 100 years is going to hit those communities with the least access to the resources the hardest. And so not only did our historical policies affect this, but now what we do going forward will affect this. So I'll stop there. My time's up.
Great points. Thank you. We appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, City Council, the 2 commissioners that are here. I want to first commend my colleague at Portland State for great empirical work. I'm going to put on my age-friendly coordinator hat today and not the research hat. I served on the project work group, and I'm really excited to see what's come forward, although I do have some recommendations and a couple criticisms or maybe even suggestions for moving forward. First and foremost, I do feel that the Better Housing by Design project is positioned to move forward equitable and age-friendly policies in the city of Portland. And I do want to note that I'm talking about equity really from this disability accessibility perspective and not the affordability perspective. And to just underscore some of the racial equity kind of lens that's been applied here as well, it's important to note that communities of color and older adults of color in particular have the highest rates of disability. And so when we think about that, the accessible, visitable component is really important. Some aspects of this that's further the comprehensive plan include equitable housing, accessible centers, physically accessible housing, accessible design for all, and aging in place. And importantly, reducing social isolation, which is an issue that I think we don't always talk about. Also, this is furthering the action plan for an age-friendly Portland and improving accessible housing, advancing opportunities for aging and community, creating accessible social spaces, again, reducing social isolation, and improving the age-friendliness of neighborhood centers. I think that it's very important, though, to think about the residential outdoor areas as part of the solution, but uncovered and inaccessible outdoor spaces don't work for everyone. So I just want to encourage us to think about things like covered courtyards and other places for people to convene in the rainy seasons of our kind of region, because the truth is that there are a lot of people who don't want to go out, you know, from about November to February in an outdoor space, that we need places that we can recreate. And I'm going to get to the last point and try to keep this short. While I support this concept of visitable housing and the bonus provision for accessible and visitable housing, it's an incentive-based approach that's not perfect. And so while it is the best tool that we have currently, we as a city need to advance a legislative agenda at the state to address issues of the Oregon Building Code Division and its minimum and maximum codes, or mini-max code standard, that does not allow us here in the city of Portland to think innovatively outside of that box. It's important for us to move forward with the state to say we want a pilot project or some exemption that would allow us to move beyond the constrictions of state code in moving that forward. I hope to be involved with that legislative push in the next year in 2020. And thank you for getting me here. I've got kids I got to pick up, so this is good, well-timed, and I'm going to run out the door after this, so thank you.
Very good. We appreciate your being here, and thanks to East Portland Action Plan, Portland State. We appreciate all your hard work. Commissioner Hardesty, did you have a comment? And there was one more person on this panel? Yes. Great. Come on up. Thanks, gentlemen. It's good to see you.
Hi, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners Fritz and Commissioner Hardesty. Thank you so much for allowing me to share Portland Public Schools' perspective on this. I think a lot of our educators, our administrators, our families, our parents know instinctively that housing matters to education.
I'm sorry to have to do, but can you put your name into the record?
Oh, I apologize. I should know better. Danny Ledesma, I'm with Portland Public Schools.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
Sure, that's okay. So we understand that housing matters to education. Not only do we know this instinctively, and do our parents and families know this, but the preponderance of the research also talks about how beyond location and proximity to schools, the quality of housing, the affordability of housing, the stability of housing plays a significant part of educational performance. Having a safe, stable, affordable home means that students are having to move less often, which not only has an impact on individual students in a classroom, but also on the classroom community where there's less mobility. Students who live in safe and quality housing are less likely to suffer from health hazards. And they're able to be more healthy and to be able to participate in school activities. Students who live closer to their neighborhood schools have a shorter commute time, if you will. They're able to walk to their schools in a safe way, and they'll be able to spend more time on their homework. So we know all these things about the connection between housing and education and health, and we also really appreciate the myriad of ways in which Portland, the City of Portland and Portland Public Schools partner. Over the last 10 months, the Portland Public Schools engaged in a significant visioning process. And during our visioning process, we're very proud of the fact that not only do we have a sort of future-focused graduate portrait that we're looking at. We're the first education district that also has a list of educator essentials as well as system shifts that are needed to achieve the vision that we have for our students. And one of the system shifts that we talk about, and one of the ways that we think that we're sisters in arms with our City of Portland partners, is that one of the items that came out is that we really need to provide flexible, future-focused environments. And plans and decisions about physical environments should be informed by two key perspectives, equity and a focus on the future. And together, these perspectives promote the development of healthy, flexible, inclusive places of learning. So like you, we're really concerned about how the physical environment, the built environment, impacts learning. And so we're really supportive of the Better Housing by Design because of all the reasons that have been listed before. But I think the two that really sort of stand out to us is the ability and the flexibility to have more outdoor space so that children can play safely. They can sort of be able to encourage and develop all parts of their selves so that they're thinking about not only their learning and emotional, but their physical parts. And then I think the other piece that we're really supportive of is the East Portland standards and the better connectivity. We know that our historically underserved students, or students of color primarily, are disproportionately impacted by displacement, by gentrification, and a lack of affordability in terms of housing. And so the more that we can support students where they're living, we also heard earlier about how students of color primarily live in multifamily dwellings. And so any enhancements to designs to make that more livable for our families and to support the different housing types for the families that are there and to support their learning, we're really supportive. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate your testimony. Thanks to PPS for all their work on this. Our final panel today is the Rosewood Initiative in East Portland. We have Jenny Glass, Ken Marks, and Joanna Molina Marcial. Did I get? Okay, can we do this? We've had a request for a how many minute break? 3-minute break. We're in recess. session, and we have the Rosewood Initiative representatives here. Jenny, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure. Good
Thanks.
afternoon. My name's Jenny Glass. I'm the Executive Director of the Rosewood Initiative. I'm not going to take a ton of time. But last year, members of our staff and community participated with Bill Cunningham and others from BPS for the Better Housing by Design listening sessions and workshops at Rosewood. Through this process and through lots and lots of other community engagement throughout the years, we have heard loud and clear from our neighbors that multifamily housing in East Portland is not currently meeting the needs of our community for a variety of reasons. So I think you're all aware of multifamily development in East has not been designed or regulated in a way that creates safe and healthy living environment for residents. These East Portland Code amendments presented in this draft are a critical start to changing that trend. Much of the existing multifamily housing in East was really not built to support people with children and has not done enough to help catalyze healthy whole neighborhoods. And because of the lack of connected street grid and lack of amenities like commercial districts and parks in East County, we need multifamily housing to provide at least some of that on-site outdoor and community and even small business spaces. Even with the recent investments in parks in East Portland, we still have a really long way to go before all people can safely access public open spaces with their families. Also, the commercial development pattern in East really reflects an era of suburbia that's just no longer relevant to how a lot of folks in East Portland actually live. People currently have to travel several miles to do their basic shopping and meet their basic needs. New multifamily housing in East Portland has the opportunity to change this by requiring outdoor space and creating ground floor community and even commercial space for organizations and local businesses to serve the community. We're hopeful that you'll approve these amendments and continue to do more to make all of the neighborhoods in East Portland great communities to live, work, and play.
Thanks, Jenny. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Is this working? There we
Yes.
go. My name's Ken Marks. I'm the Director of Transportation Equity at the Rosewood Initiative. As you know, my area of interest is transportation, so I'm going to come at this from that perspective. East Portland development, as Jenny just mentioned, is from a bygone day where the auto was the preeminent means of transportation. Thus, the street network does not support alternative modes like walking, biking, or accessing transit. This plan goes a long way towards doing that in many ways. One is creating a better connectivity network for pedestrians so that they can get from the inner part of the mega blocks to the corridors where the transit exists. That's a major thing, and we really push that when we're going through this process. And we thank BPS for being open to ensuring that connectivity for pedestrians was a major part of this for the East Portland segment. Another aspect of why this is beneficial to East Portlanders is just the way that the apartments or multifamily housing will be oriented towards the street. The way currently that they're oriented is way off of the streets where people have to go through parking lots where people are at risk, especially children and people with disabilities, seniors. This reorients the housing to the corridors and makes the access to transit much easier. It makes just the walkability much easier for people. The addition of, businesses on the ground floor increases people's ability to walk to places as opposed to driving to meet their needs. I want to also touch on something that the professor from PSU had highlighted. East Portland is a heat island in the summer, and it is essentially an iceberg in the winter. This plan will address those problems, and those problems create barriers to people walking and people getting to transit. If it's 90 degrees outside or 100 degrees outside and you're walking along asphalt with no shade, then, and you've got a health issue, then you're probably not going out. You're not going to that doctor's appointment. You're not going to meet with your friends. You're not doing those things because it is unbearable. You are at risking your life when you do that. And that is not hyperbole. That is a real fact. If you have children, you are less likely to walk along or in those conditions. There's another thing that the professor didn't mention that you should also be aware of. The environment, the built environment, has psychological impacts on people as well as physical impacts. If you don't have greenery, then, and you don't have those things that make you want to be out and walking, that increases your stress. Portland State has done a numerous studies on this. That stress has physiological impacts on you, and not just adults, but children. Again, this plan will go to or work towards addressing those problems, and in so doing, it will make accessing or using alternative means other than a car much easier for people, and that has many impacts or benefits, including climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, that concludes our panel discussion. So now we're going to open up the floor for public testimony. Carla's going to read the names, 3 minutes each, please. And if you could just state your name for the record. We don't need to know your street address or anything like that unless you'd like everybody in the city to know.
I show 32 people left on the list.
All right, we'll just get through as many as we can. I have to leave at about 10 till, but we'll get us through as many as we can today.
Okay. First three, please come on up, are Terry Parker, Fred Leeson, and Lawrence Kojaku. Sorry.
Thank you and welcome and thank you for your patience. Guess I need more coffee. Yeah. Terry, do you want to start for us, please?
Terry Parker, Northeast Portland, fourth generation Portlander. Close to 89% of households in the Portland metro area have one or more cars. 72% of households living in apartment complexes with no off-street parking have one or more cars. Between 2010 and 2035, Portland's growth rate is projected to include 260,000 more people, which equates to 123,000 more households. Included with the majority of these households is approximately 100,000 more cars. Car trips are expected to increase by 49% regardless of how much mass transit is added. Adequate off-street parking needs to be required with all new residential development, be it close to transit or not. For people with electric cars, adequate means on-site overnight charging access with no need to run long extension cords across sidewalks or down the block. While 59% of low-income people drive to their place of employment, for people who use alternative modes to commute, adequate off-street parking means a safe place to store their cars, possibly for days at a time. Moreover, adequate parking requires no less than 3 spaces for every 4 units, with 1 space per unit preferred. Per both TriMet and Metro surveys, congestion, road maintenance, and the need to increase motor vehicle capacity and infrastructure were among the top transportation-related priorities. Instead of engaging in failed social engineering car-hater policies that include a lack of parking and creating more congestion with road diets, the will of the survey respondents needs to be applied. No democratic city or government should be denying residents the freedom of mobility a car provides, either by dictatorial deterrent taxation or lack of infrastructure. A reality check is needed. Requiring off-street parking is both an equity and livability issue that needs to be one of the design components of better housing. The street should not be utilized for 24/7 car storage, which in turn generates negative impacts for residential neighborhoods. Such impacts include drivers circling to find a parking place. A Peabody employee recently told me the expectation is that people moving to Portland will not have cars. That's a sheer fantasy. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, my name is Fred Leese, and I'm a board member of the Architectural Heritage Center that I'm representing today. We've been following better housing by design from the outset, hoping to find ways to achieve greater density without denigrating the scale and context of our historic districts, notably the Alphabet District, Kings Hill, and Irvington. For Commissioner Hardesty, I will say that the minority percentage of residents in Irvington and Alphabet districts exceed the average throughout the city. Half of the kids at Irvington School are on free lunch. We're not all wealthy. We're not all white. We've collaborated repeatedly with the neighborhood associations involved. We're appreciative of the time Bill Cunningham took to meet with us and to hear our ideas and discuss potential outcomes. Personally, I believe his attitude has helped restore the concept of citizen planning that many of us feel has been greatly devalued in Portland in recent years. I'll touch briefly on 3 elements currently in the plan that we support and encourage you to adopt. First is the rearrangement of zones in the Alphabet District that is intended to make the new buildings more compatible with the scale of the historic buildings. Second, the largest scale zone, RM4, is defined differently in historic districts than elsewhere. The base floor area ratio is somewhat lower, again, to make the buildings more compatible with the scale of the largest historic apartment buildings. This is somewhat the issue that Kristen Miner was addressing, and I endorse her testimony. Third, the plan expands opportunities for floor area ratios to be transferred from historic buildings to other buildings in all multifamily zones if proceeds from the transfers are used to help finance the cost of seismic bracing of the historic buildings. That's just one approach that can help the seismic issue. Of course, the preservation community so far has not achieved all that we might want to wish, that we would wish for. Imagine that. Our president, Steve Dodderer, has submitted a detailed written testimony, although he could not be here today. Larry Kojaku, who sits beside me, is a member of our planning committee, and he will summarize key elements that remain on our wish list. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty,
Good afternoon.
one moment.
Excuse me for just a sec. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say, I just have a house in Irvington, and I'm not rich or white. So my implication was not that everybody in historic districts are rich.
Thank you.
However, I want to be very clear. The way we've done land use planning has benefited some communities at the expense of others.
No problem. And also, I can say as an Irvington resident that Irvington was also a victim of redlining for many, many years.
Well, we could talk about
Thank you.
It depends on what side of the street you were on and whether or not you were...
Which side of 15th? Yeah.
Side of 15th. I was on the other side, so I know what you're talking about.
Good afternoon.
I'm Larry Kojaku from the Advocacy Committee of the Architectural Heritage Center. We are requesting 3 changes to the recommended draft, as you can see on the second page of our handout. First, we ask that the zoning map of the Kings Hill Historic District be further revised by assigning the RM3 zone to a few blocks containing mostly historic houses, as shown on the map attached to your handout. We are asking for the same rationale, the pattern of scale of historic buildings that was correctly applied to rearranging the zones in the Alphabet District to be applied to Kings Hill. This would have little effect on housing capacity since immediately outside the historic district boundary, the recommended draft upzones the equivalent of over 3 blocks. Second, we ask that historic districts be excluded from the 100-foot height allowance within 1,000 feet of a max station, as was done in the original proposed draft. Restoring this exclusion would be consistent with the exclusion of historic districts from 100-foot heights near streets with frequent bus service. In the few blocks of the Alphabet District affected by this 10-story height allowance, there are no buildings even half as tall, so required approval by the Landmarks Commission would be very unlikely. Please note that this height allowance does not require affordable units beyond the citywide minimum, while the default RM4 zone would require increasing proportions of affordable units to gain additional size and height. Finally, we ask that a provision be added that denies bonuses and transfers to sites in historic districts where a historic building is demolished. Because the recommended draft does not not only applies all development incentives to historic districts, but greatly increases them, a higher threat of demolition is inevitable, since historic districts are largely built out. We have no objection to the demolition of non-contributing buildings, but the demolition of historic buildings should not be rewarded with additional allowances. These changes are minor in the context of citywide zoning, but would have a huge impact on fragile historic districts with vulnerable historic buildings. I'd like to mention that just as national parks belong to all Americans, historic districts that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places belong to all of us, and we really need to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your handout as well. Appreciate it. Next three, please, Carla.
Are Doug Klotz, Michael Anderson, and Tony Jordan.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your patience. You want to go ahead and start?
Hi.
Thanks.
I'm Doug Klotz. There's a handout, but I'm here it looks like this. I'm here representing Inner Southeast Action, which is a community group embracing change to promote livability, inclusivity, sustainability, and climate protection, and we also support housing affordability. Better housing by design will increase the number of units that can be built near jobs, transit, and shopping, which will result in less driving and less carbon emissions. As REACH CDC said, it will promote affordable housing and better housing across the city. We support all the changes proposed, especially the change from unit count to FAR in calculations. This will allow more units, and there's also inclusionary zoning, and additionally, the deep affordability bonus in CM2 that Bill told you about. We do support FAR transfers to preserve affordable housing and to preserve trees, and we also support transferring it into historic districts as the Planning and Sustainability Commissions supported. Along with Portlanders for Parking Reform, we support elimination of parking requirements in all multifamily zones, including more than 500 feet from transit, where demand is less and transit is still an easy walk. And 500 feet is like 2 blocks. We support reduction of side setbacks to 5 feet and reduced front setbacks, which will give you more flexibility. If there's a tree in the backyard, you can slide the building toward the street. If the tree's in front, you can slide the building back. But with a built-in required setback in front, you sometimes are not given that flexibility. The other thing I want to mention with regard to trees and heat islands is we need to get more street trees, and we're getting less and less with every new building. There's a PBOT initiative called Streets 2035, which is private meetings that I can't go to, but the vaults under the sidewalk are precluding street trees. Look at the new buildings around downtown. There's like blank sidewalks with no trees. So that needs to be addressed everywhere. We support PBOT's Connected Centers project in East Portland. And we do have some concerns about the FAR in inner corridors like Belmont and Division, which is, we think, too low to take full advantage of the good transit service there. It could be that we may need to talk about changing the zoning, just moving some of the better housing by design zones, to move them around a little to get a higher rate in there. So, but otherwise, we support that. I wanted to talk a little about the Alphabet District, and especially what Ms. Miner said. I think that in a historic district, you look at Europe, they build new big buildings right next to 300-year-old buildings. But the Landmarks Commission's testimony, the PLHC strongly opposes opportunity to earn more bulk in these areas, in other words, get more FAR for having affordable housing, even for deeply needed affordable housing. That's their words. So I think we need to have some relook at how we treat historic districts.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Michael Anderson. I live near the 60th Avenue Max stop. I'm a senior researcher at Sightline Institute. It's a sustainability think tank for the Pacific Northwest. I think of myself as an analyst more than an advocate, but I'm speaking today on behalf of my colleague Madeline Kovacs, who's unable to attend. She'll be submitting Sightline's generally supportive letter to the record. Better housing by design, she says, has improved in many ways in the last 4 years. Sightline's analysis is that this reform will improve affordability and reduce aggregate displacement while legalizing greener housing amid our climate crisis. She also wanted me to say that Sightline disagrees strongly with the recommendation to push front setbacks from 3 to 10 feet. Sidewalk stoops are perfectly suited to a vibrant urban environment, and hundreds, if not thousands, of homes might be lost over a 20-year period if all new buildings have to give up that space. It's not just about those 7 feet, it's about the fact that they make possible the entire project and pay for the good things like inclusionary housing and other costs that are carried along with the project. I'm also here to briefly present research on one particular aspect of the proposal before you, the effect of parking on affordability. The following numbers don't come from us. They come from the city's website inside the modeling that the city contracted. So here are the city's own findings. What the analysis found was that on a 10,000 square foot lot in the new RM2 zone in a relatively close-in Portland neighborhood, like the one I personally rent in, 2 scenarios are the most likely. Scenario 1 is a row of 10 townhomes that sell for $730,000 each with 0 below-market homes. Scenario 2 is a mixed-income condo building, including 4 privately financed community land trust homes that are affordable to those preschool teachers and nursing assistants, and 28 brand-new market-rate units that cost just $280,000. That comes to a monthly mortgage payment of $1,400, so affordable to the second-year elementary school teacher at PPS or 2 retail workers who make $12 an hour. There's no question which of those 2 scenarios is better for affordability and for the climate. There's one thing that makes a difference between those 2 scenarios, and that is whether or not off-street parking is required. If the homes are required to have garages, either by the government or by the bank that writes the construction loan, then townhomes are the likeliest option. If no parking is required, then the mixed-income condo will be the likeliest option. You can see that in the slides here. These bars basically show the probability of different projects happening. The first shows that with parking, the likeliest project is the $730,000 townhomes. The second chart shows a world without on-site parking where the likeliest project becomes the mixed-income flats, where even the market-rate homes are just $280,000. Removing the city parking requirement will not guarantee mixed-income condos are built. Lenders may require the building to have the anyway, but given these city findings, it would seem very, very strange for the city to require parking anywhere in this zone. Most Portland households own cars and will continue to, and building practices will reflect this. But there's nowhere in Portland that auto storage is more important than housing, and the city's laws should reflect that too.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Jordan, and I'm going to follow up and talk a little bit more about parking, as you might expect. I agree with everything Michael just said. I strongly encourage reading his post that went out on Sightline today. It's very informative and well-researched. And I'm going to speak specifically, add a little bit more about these parking requirements. So Better Housing by Design, anything that's already exempted from parking, which is near transit, is exempted from further parking requirements. And also, lots that are smaller than 10,000 square feet are exempted. So actually, most of the zones that are affected by Better Housing Design don't have parking requirements already. I believe it's only like 1,000 lots in the city that would be impacted by these parking requirements. And most of them are just outside of the border. So this is, I don't know if you can see this, this is like just an example of where the parking is required near Ladd's Addition. And you have these little pockets that are just, like no one would say that this street, which is Salmon Street, is a bad place to live without a car. But our current requirements, because they're just as arbitrary based on 500 square feet from a transit stop, leave little places out. We have an example of this at the Sunshine Dairy over by 20th and the Banfield. It's 70 feet too far, and as a result, they have to seek a variance to have no parking. So I just wonder what is really the big danger to eliminating these requirements that only really apply to 1,000 spaces anyway. There's another wrinkle, which is Better Housing by Design smartly makes parking somewhat more environmental. I don't believe you can actually have environmentally friendly parking, but it does require more permeability and covered parking spaces. That makes parking that you do have to build more expensive. So if we are requiring parking on some lots, even a small amount, but we're making them more expensive, we're kind of at cross purposes to our goals. We want affordable housing and green development. So I just think that in light of for climate purposes, there are other ways to manage the concerns that could come from adding housing without parking. As Michael mentioned, there will still be parking. There is a lot of structured parking that is going to be here forever, but we can advance our already developed permitting processes and neighborhood parking management toolkits in order to to alleviate any problems that might pop up. Someone earlier, I think from PSU, said, these structures will be here for a long, long time. We need to be looking towards a future where if everyone is still owning a car, we've messed up really badly. So I suggest cutting those 1,000 lots out of this and just getting rid of the parking requirements altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Lyran Murphy, Ron Chandler, and Charles Bridgecrane. I think Charles might have left. Oh, yeah, they've got it.
He had enough of it.
Looks like Charles is gone. We'll go with Alan Kessler.
Good afternoon. Would you like to go ahead and start, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Bruce Nelson.
Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Lyran Murphy, and I am here today to address a specific property and ask for a small technical fix to Better Housing by Design that would otherwise be an extremely lengthy and potentially cost-prohibitive process for us. We purchased the Jacob H. Cook House on Southeast Belmont in Mount Tabor out of auction in 2018, and we've spent the past 14 months restoring the house. The house had been abandoned for 8 years. Yeah.
Thanks.
The house had been abandoned for 8 years and had been badly vandalized, and it had been a target for a lot of illicit activity. The house was also identified as a significant historic resource in a project that the city did in the late 80s. And the neighbors and the community have just been so involved in this process, and they've been so excited, and they're really engaged, and they reach out to us daily in social media and online, and they come by the property, and they're just really excited about the project. Anyway, we are currently looking for creative and economically viable opportunities to open this house up to the community and allow folks to be a part of this. But we are running into a significant challenge in being able to get the permitting to be able to find an adaptive reuse for this project. If you look at the second page of the handout that I've given you, it shows the zoning map for this project. And you can see where that thick black line runs across the middle of the page. That's the zoning line. Everything below that is zoned R2. Everything above that line is zoned R5. And you can see where I've drawn that little circle there. 6 feet of this house sits in that R5 zone. That 6 feet represents a enclosed back porch and a small room off the kitchen. And because of that mixed zoning, we are not allowed to apply for any sort of alternative uses for the property right now. We don't have an option to share it with the community. And so what we're asking for today as part of this project, and as part of our ability to be able to do adaptive reuse, is to move that line back the 6 feet where you see I've drawn in that dotted line that would allow us to go and apply for different permits, and it would give us the opportunity to open up the house to the community. Additionally,
Commissioner Hardesty.
What does that mean when you say open up the house to the community?
well, I believe that the house should be shared, small events, rehearsal dinners, community engagements.
So it'd be a place that people could rent for community events? That's not quite the same as, being open to the community. So I'm glad we have that clarification. Thank you.
I actually, our plan was to open we did extensive gardens around the property, and our plan was to open up those gardens to the community. And we have invited the community in the house frequently. We bring people through all the time. And so while, yes, it would be a place for small events, it's also a place that I want to open up to organizations like the Architectural Heritage Center, to different community gatherings that aren't part of a paying event option. I do believe this house should be shared, and that's why I've spent my whole life restoring it for the past 14 months. So I want it to be a part of the community. Additionally, we have been approved for a state incentive program that obligates us to apply for national and state historic designation, and we are pursuing that direction.
Great. Commissioner Fritz.
And I believe, because thank you for sending in your testimony by email in advance, you've also applied to be on the National Historic Register.
We're working on that,
Working
yes.
on that.
Yep.
And I'm assuming usually we don't have lots that have got one zoning on one side and 2 different zones.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it would be all right with you if it was just all rezoned to R2? rather than just moving that line?
Absolutely. That doesn't change how anyone else would use the property. It doesn't change if a developer were to come in and decide to tear the house down. It doesn't change how they would be able to use the property either.
Thank you.
And let me just congratulate you. I think this is fantastic what you've done here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Ron Chandler. I've also been a longtime East Portland resident for 40 years. I submitted arguments in favor of increased density, so I will just jump over reading this. I'll just read the 7 highlights.
Thanks.
Also, I wanted to take a moment to commend Bill Cunningham. He has been a terrific resource and extraordinarily available. I mean, somehow or another I got his phone number. I couldn't believe every time I called, he picked up the phone. I mean, and he responded to emails. If he didn't answer the phone, he responded to emails quickly. So anyway, reasons why high density is a good idea for our city. First of all, it's geographically easier to manage school districts. It's lower cost to maintain infrastructure for governments. Sprawl doesn't pay the bills. More details on that. Low-density developments often do not provide a large enough tax base to cover the cost of public services. Mixed-use developments with retail and apartments tend to pay a higher commercial tax rate and provide more services privately than communities made up of single-family homes. Higher density development helps attract new employers. Higher density development can increase property values. Believe it or not, higher density development generates less traffic than low density development per unit. While residents of low density single-family communities often have 2 or more cars per household, residents of high density apartments and condominiums tend to have only 1 car per household. When public transportation is readily available, people in walkable communities will often opt to use it. And finally, it gets rid of urban blight. I did submit this document on the testimony webpage, so it's available and incomplete, and I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. Next 3, please, Carla.
Was Alan Kessler here? Okay, Bruce Nelson, John Gibbon, Tracy Prince, and Daniel Solomon.
And then can I see a show of hands? How many people have not testified yet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, we will not be able to finish it today, but I want to promise you, if you're not testifying today, that you will be at the top of the list when we reconvene. And of course, we will take written testimony if you'd prefer. And I appreciate your patience and your forbearance. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, or almost good evening. I want to congratulate the mayor and the commissioners for your stamina. Congratulations. My name is Bruce Nelson. I'm here this evening to speak on behalf of Trees for Life. My comments will specifically pertain to trees that relate to this particular document. One very petty suggestion is in the portion that deals with the floor area ratio standard. In regards to trees, there is reference to dead, dying, and dangerous. Later on in that section, the terms that are used are dead, diseased, and dangerous. Dying and diseased are not synonymous. It would behoove the city to delete the word diseased and only use dying. Otherwise, you open up a can of worms later on. Now, on to some more specific concerns I have. I am specifically addressing the East Portland standard. The high-density housing is going to go along highly traveled roads. There will be more housing going in there that will lead to the removal of a number of trees for these development projects. These particular neighborhoods in East County currently have an average tree canopy of 23%. The goal for the city is 30%. The current canopy level in Eastmoreland is 42% and Laurelhurst is 38%. The results with this increased high-density housing, the removal of trees for this, and probably lack of guidance in how you include space for trees in these developments, we're going to lead to, in East Portland in particular, we're not going to meet the COMP 35 standards principles that talk about environmental health and equity. These are not going to, I'll say they're inadequately met because trees are not being taken into account. I would suggest that one way to improve this would be somehow we need a comprehensive and coordinated long-term plan to improve the canopy in East Portland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
My name is John Gibbon. I'm First Vice President of Sweeney, Transportation Representative for the Markham neighborhood, which is one of the, what I want to say, Portland south of 5, south of 99W neighborhoods in that area. I'm speaking today related to transportation issues that this project raises in the Markham neighborhood. We only have 2 pieces of property in Markham that are affected by this. One is an existing apartment complex on the off-ramp at 35th and Taylor's Ferry Road. And the other one is a piece of developed as a single-family parcel, but R2 zoned property at the on-ramp at Spring Garden, and it's actually at the intersection of Southwest 20th and 21st, which really does exist in Southwest Portland. There's an intersection where 2 numbered streets come together, and it's right in front of this piece of property. In both those cases, the problem we have is not with the zoning. Obviously, it's already been zoned that way, and this upgrade is good. But in both cases, we don't have safe pedestrian and bicycle access from either of those properties. It's a situation where the city is going to have to take a serious look at getting us that last 2 or 3 blocks over to Spring Garden so people can walk across and get to the Barber Transit Corridor, or at 35th, they're going to have to do vegetation management so the kids that live in the apartment complex on the east side of 35th Avenue across from the state highway yards have an ability to walk the 4 blocks it takes to get up to Jackson Middle School. And I know Commissioner Fritz has worked with our neighborhoods over a long period of time in trying to get sidewalks along 35th, and we understand they're expensive, difficult kind of things, but if you're going to do this upzoning, which it essentially is, and you're going to say this is where we want people to live in multifamily, we've got to come to grips with the transportation issues. The existing apartment complex sees a bus for about 10 hours, 12 hours a day on the weekdays, not on the weekends. So that's the issue for Southwest.
Thank you. Appreciate your coming in, sir. Good afternoon.
Yes. My name is Daniel Salomon, and I am a disabled Section 8 renter in Goose Hollow. I'm very lucky to live in a neighborhood where the neighborhood association fights so hard to protect its low-income renters. People seem to have the wrong idea about the Kings Hill Historic District, which is in the Goose Hollow neighborhood. In fact, Kings Hill is not a high-income area. The median household income for Kings Hill is more than 9% lower than in the rest of Portland. Many people also seem to have the wrong idea about Goose Hollow. In fact, Goose Hollow residents are 80% renters, and half of those are low income. Our neighborhood association has worked to make sure that our board members represent our diverse demographics. Half of our neighborhood association boards are renters, and half are low income. All of our low income board members live in Kings Hill in the naturally occurring affordable housing of mid-rise apartment buildings and boogled houses that have been converted to apartments. 20% of our board are people of color. We joined the Architectural Heritage Center and the Northwest District Association and asking you to right-size the zoning to RM3 for Kings Hill and to lower height limits within 1,000 feet of the Goose Hollow Max Station, which touches part of Kings Hill and would cause demolitions. When we ask for these things, we are asking you to protect the most affordable housing in our neighborhood. Thanks very much.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Good evening, and I'm
Hi.
sorry you're going to be the last person to
I
testify.
made it.
Yeah, so I apologize to those of you who didn't.
Sorry. So I'm Tracy Prince. I'm on the board of the Architectural Heritage Center, but I'm here as the president of the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Association, and we represent Kings Hill Historic District. It's predominantly mid-rise apartments that have our most affordable housing in Goose Hollow. We've done a Craigslist rental search, and we found that the apartments in Kings Hill are half the price per square foot of outside of Kings Hill. So it is a dramatically affordable area with naturally occurring affordable housing. More than half of our board are low-income residents, and we have many families who live, with several children living in one-bedroom apartments. This is very common on Kings Hill. And so we want to make sure everybody understands the demographic we're dealing with, because I think they see the big old houses and that's what they think is the predominant demographic. We support subdividing those big old houses and putting 2 historically appropriate ADUs in the backyard. We just don't want the big old houses demolished, so that's all we're asking for. The current RM4 zoning, as proposed in this draft, incentivizes the demolition of 8 buildings on Kings Hill. And if these 8 buildings were demolished, then that would cause the entire district to be delisted. When Kings Hill was created, the zoning was never changed. So we're asking to right-size the zoning at this point. Although Kings Hill is a smaller historic district than Alphabet, it was listed a decade earlier and should receive the same consideration in the zoning as the Alphabet Historic District. So we're asking for a small section to be looked at for RM3. The neighboring Kings Hill and Alphabet Historic Districts have mirror images of each other, with the larger RM4 mostly up against Burnside. The Alphabet District map was changed in this process with the support of the Northwest District Association with a really fine grain analysis. And so we're asking for a little bit more fine grain analysis on ours with just the 8 spots. We want to set fair expectations. We have developers come to our planning committee, and they think that because it says 100 foot here, that they can get it, and then we have to tell them, no, you can't, and then Landmarks has to tell them, no, you can't. So we think with the right size zoning that it just sets all the expectations from the beginning. It makes it much easier for everyone to understand what they can achieve in a historic district. And we are pro-density. We are the densest neighborhood in all of Oregon.
Very good. Well, first of all, thank you, everyone who did testify today. For those of you who did not and want to testify at the next hearing, we will still entertain your written testimony. So if you want to get that to us like tonight, we will read that and we will have it, and you can still come in and testify in person. So that concludes the council's acceptance of oral testimony for today. This public hearing is continued to Wednesday, November 6th at 2 p.m., time certain, at which time we will continue to hear additional oral testimony, starting with the people who've signed up today but did not get the opportunity to testify. The written record will remain open until November 6th. So again, please feel free to send us your emails. We will read them. When council reconvenes, we may introduce amendments. If at that time council determines additional public testimony is warranted for any proposed amendments, the council may reopen the record for the limited purpose of testimony on those amendments. Did I get everything, legal counsel?
Yes.
Very good. And I'll just say this. This was some of the best public testimony I've heard in a long time. People spent a ton of time preparing for this, and it showed. And I want to thank you, and I look forward to reading and or hearing the testimony from those of you who did not get a chance to testify today. So with that, we are adjourned.